Welcome to the House Committee on State Government and Elections. Today is Wednesday, March 24th, 2021. We're in the House Lounge. There are 19 bills on today's calendar. I'll take a motion to hold all 19 bills for further study. Moved by Vice Chair Corvese. Good point. Let's take attendance first. Madam Clerk.
Chairman Shanley.
Present.
First Vice Chair Messier. Second Vice Chair Corvese. Here. Representative Ackerman.
Here.
Representative Agello.
Here.
Representative Baginski.
Present.
Representative Felix.
Present.
Representative Hull.
Present.
Representative Kennedy.
Present.
Representative Knight.
Here.
Representative McGaugh. Representative Nardone. Representative Newberry.
Here.
Representative Shawcross-Smith. Representative Tansey.
Present.
Chairman, we have a quorum.
Good afternoon again, and welcome to the House Committee on State Government and Elections. Today is Wednesday, March 24th, 2021. We're in the House Lounge. There are 19 bills on today's calendar to consider. I will entertain a motion to hold all 19 bills on the calendar for further study. Moved by Vice Chair Corvese, seconded by Deputy Whip Ackerman. Can we have a roll call vote, Madam Clerk?
Chair Shanley.
Yes.
First Vice Chair Messier. Second Vice Chair Corvese.
Yes.
Representative Ackerman.
Yes.
Representative Agello.
Yes.
Representative Baginski.
Yes.
Representative Felix.
Yes.
Representative Hull.
Yes.
Representative Kennedy.
Yes.
Representative Knight.
Yes.
Representative McGaugh. Representative Nardone. Representative Newberry.
Yes.
Representative Shawcross-Smith. Representative Tansey.
Yes.
The ayes have it.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So as I indicated, we have 19 bills on today's calendar and a lot of witnesses signed up for those bills. So we're going to be limiting testimony to 3 minutes per witness. So please, everybody, do your best to limit your testimony to 3 minutes. If you are here for House Bill 5755 or House Bill 6003, those bills have the most witnesses, and the remaining bills don't have nearly as many witnesses. So we're going to try and get through all the other bills before we move on to 5755 and 6003. With that said, the Secretary of State would like to testify on a few of the bills. So Deputy Whip Ackerman's bill, House Bill 5944, is the first bill that we're going to consider. And Deputy Whip Ackerman is on the committee and here to present. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Good evening, colleagues. I introduced House Bill 5944 on the behalf of the Secretary of State, Gorbea. The bill revises the State Archives and Historical Records Statute, which governs the administration and preservation of our state's documents and historical records, which play a key role in maintaining transparency. As the official repository of our state records, the oldest of which dates back to 1638, it is critical that our laws are updated to represent best practices in archival preservation. This bill accomplishes that goal by revising definitions, clarifying language, and reporting requirements, among other issues, which I'll let the Secretary discuss. Through this bill, we can ensure that the permanent records that agencies generate today are retained so that they may be preserved in the archives facility in the future. And as a note, I had the opportunity to visit the new location for the State Archives earlier this week, and I recommend any one of you to stop by for a tour. We are so fortunate to have such a wealth of historical documents and records that are carefully preserved in this new facility, and And I'll have to tell you, my favorite document was George Washington's resignation, and it was in his own handwriting. It was the coolest thing. So I highly recommend a visit for everybody. And with that, I can take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions for Deputy Whip Ackerman? No questions. So we're going to have Whip Kazarian introduce her legislation 6003 so that the secretary can testify to whatever extent she wishes on that bill as well. Whip Kazarian, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. House Bill 6003 might look kind of similar. Lots of parts of it have already been introduced this year through different bills that do parts of it. But this bill is the most comprehensive version. It would codify a lot of the voter rights that we implemented for the pandemic. It also does some other good housekeeping measures. It would put all three different types of voting, so mail ballot voting, in-day, same-day in-person voting, and early in-person voting on the same footing. It would take some other best practices from other states, and altogether, the goal of this bill would be to increase the access to the ballot and to make sure that the process is more secure. So I'm going to talk about a few of the different parts of it specifically, and then talk about some of those miscellaneous pieces. So for mail ballots, the adjustments to the mail ballot process, this would allow everybody to opt into the permanent mail ballot list without an excuse. So right now you need to have an excuse in order to receive a mail ballot and to be on that permanent list. This would eliminate that. It would also allow you to apply online for a mail ballot and apply online to be on that permanent mail ballot list. It would remove the witness notary requirement. And the reason for this removal is because with our updated technology, we no longer need that process that we used to use. It would allow it to be done in two ways. The first way is by hand. This would require two different people to review the signatures and to verify that they match. And the second way would be able to use, and that's been done since 2018. And the second way would allow us to use the machine electronic signature match. This is a machine that we've already purchased. This machine also sorts ballots, it opens them, and it does have this ability to also match the signatures. It would also ask us to require that more mail ballot boxes be available. And it also has a requirement that not only mail ballot boxes are required to be there, but that more are available. So we would have at least one mail box for every 20,000 voters in an area. And then last, talking about election security, we would rely more on our electronic voting rolls. So this would allow us to do some instantaneous updates to those voter rolls, make sure that we're checking on voters and making sure that the right people are at the right polling places and have the right addresses attached to them. A lot of these processes are already used in Colorado. I do want to mention that because they are a much bigger state than us, and they do work well in their state. We've taken some other parts from other states. Again, they're the most tried and true methods, and that's why we're trying to bring them here to Rhode Island. Last, a few of the miscellaneous parts that this bill would do. It would move up the primary date. Actually, I think Representative Newberry introduced a similar bill, maybe in a past year, something about something about moving up a primary date. I do know that that's a bipartisan issue, though. Right now, Rhode Island does have the latest primary date in the United States, so this would move that up. And again, just addressing that voter roll maintenance. And then the last part, which I think is probably one of the most important parts, we have been speaking with some of the blind voters throughout Rhode Island. And right now for blind voters, they do have to request their mail ballots 45 days ahead of the election instead of 21. So this would bring them back to 21 just like everybody else. So that's just a few pieces of the bill, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Any questions for Whip Kazarian from members of the committee? Representative Agello.
Perhaps just a comment, Mr. Chairman.
Of course.
Representative Kazarian, my understanding is that it would be better in terms of finalizing the results of the primary for mail ballots to be sent to overseas military In particular, if we had our election, our primary election, a bit earlier.
Yeah, that's correct. Right now, they have to, I think it's 45 days that they have to get their mail ballot. So moving the primary date would help them and ensure that their ballots are also counted in the election. That's a great point. Thank you.
Is there another reason besides that?
Well, it's really to help those that are working on the elections, that are counting the ballots, just giving them a little bit more time between the primary date and the general election. So those are the two main reasons that I heard. Another point I'd like to make is I heard from so many constituents this past year throughout the pandemic, or through this election that we had during the pandemic, about how much they really appreciated being able to vote early in person, being able to vote by mail. We saw record numbers of people participating in their right to vote, participating in our democracy, and that's really what we want here. We want to make sure that everybody who's eligible, we're making their access to the ballot easier, and we're getting them to participate in the election. So that's the main goal.
Any further questions for Whip Kazarian? Thank you very much.
Thanks.
The first witness that we're going to go to, returning back to House Bill 5944, is Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea, and we have her available on WebEx. I believe she's also going to testify on Whip Kazarian's bill, as well as Representative Batista's bill, House Bill 5998, that he will be there later to introduce. Madam Secretary, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Shanley. The question, so I can do 5944 and 6003 right now. Do you want me to hold off on Rep. Batista's until he's able to present it, or
No,
how do
you can do all three in one shot.
Oh my goodness. And then we still have the 250th Commission, but that's okay. So let me start by saying thank you very much for hearing my testimony. In fact, I was going to start my stopwatch so that I'm cognizant of the fact that there are many other people wanting to speak tonight and have your attention as well. So I will start that as well for me, because I get very excited about these topics and can do so for a long time. The bills regarding the archives, I'll start with that. The archives and the Public Records Administration. Those are bills number 5944 and 5998. 5998 was introduced by Whip Ackerman, and I want to thank her, of course, for introducing it. As Secretary of State, I want to make sure the government works for people. And that's why my core mission in this agency is to ensure that government is accessible and transparent for all Rhode Islanders. And we accomplish that through a variety of ways. One of the ways is through elections, and I'll talk a little bit more about the bill with regards to elections. That's usually how I come in front of this committee. But just as important is that there be a strong record retention laws that foster increased government accountability. What we save and how accessible it is to the public is a key component of how we're able to keep government accountable. And these bills, both 5944 and 5998, update the statutes that govern the state archives, specifically the proper retention of state documents, as well as then the administration of public records. These bills guarantee public access to records at all levels of government in Rhode Island. So it's a very comprehensive measure. And they're needed to strengthen our state's Access to Public Records Act, or APRA, as it's affectionately called by those who use it often. And so I want to thank both Whip Ackerman and also Representative Jose Batista for introducing this legislation on behalf of my office. And I'm joined today by Ashley Salima, the Rhode Island State Archivist, who can definitely answer even more specific questions that the committee may have. So the proper management, retention, and disposal of public records is a foundational element of ensuring that public records are accessible when they're requested. The current Public Records Administration law has been in place since 1981, and many of the sections have not been updated since then. So as you know, the way we communicate and the very records we create have changed considerably over the past 40 years. The ways, in fact, I would venture to say the way we even generate public records over the last 10 years has dramatically changed. And so the way we require that those records be maintained and be accessible has to change and evolve. This legislation incorporates best practices that really make it so that across all state and municipal government, we have a clear set of rules, clarifies the roles and responsibilities for agencies and municipal government, and establishes clear reporting mechanisms that enhance transparency. So for the public records bill that I'm proposing, the key elements are we're creating an effective and efficient records management system that has a robust training program. We're going to foster collaboration between state and municipal entities and the Public Record Administration within the state archives that makes it so that we're staying current with constantly evolving industry standards. This is one of the challenges of laws, right? That technology changes things and we don't necessarily stay current within the legal framework. We're going to require agencies to designate a records officer who has the responsibility for compliance and communicating the Public Records Administration. So they are going to be required to go through orientation and training and be that one person that people know they can go to retrieve a record. And we're going to update a lot of definitions that really we need to do because we need to better reflect practices in modern records management. Now, the second bill, the one that Ackerman discussed, is the statute that governs the administration and preservation of our state's documents and historical records. And I do want to echo the invitation to say that you should definitely come by the archives at some point. We're taking appointments. You can make an appointment to, whether you're a member of the public or a member of the General Assembly, to come see what we have. There's also a lot online as well. So that law was enacted in 1989 and has not been substantially revised since then. And so the proposed updates are going to be, again, updating definitions, but also moving the local records government program to the Public Records Administration Act, making it easier seamlessly in terms of what's required in the law, consolidating and clarifying annual reporting requirements of the archives, and then granting the administrator the authority to bring an action in Superior Court to address violations or threaten violations of the Act. If there's no teeth in these kinds of requirements, it's very hard to preserve that kind of openness and transparency that I know we all want to have. As Rep. Ackerman said, we have that these documents go all the way back to the founding of our state and our country, and we want to be much more proactive in training and equipping public entities with clear processes and tools to make sure that we're not saving stuff that we don't need to save, but really making it easily accessible, the documents that we do need to store and have available to the public or to whoever might need them. So again, thank you for the opportunity to testify. Actually, those are on the two bills. Can I switch over to elections?
Yes, feel free.
Okay, hold on, I'm going to start my timer again here. Just finding my notes on this. Here it is. Okay, so I want to say that I wholeheartedly support House Bill 6003, and thank you so much to Whip Kazarian. Oh, I got my titles mixed up here. Whip Kazarian for introducing this legislation, and for the coalition of organizations that are supporting this important proposal for expanding voting rights and access in the state. The legislation does continue the progress that we've made over the past 6 years, improving access to the ballot box while securing the integrity of every vote. And this is important at a time when we see states working to restrict voting options for their citizens. We're seeing this all across our country. So Rhode Island needs to continue to be a leader in voting access, and this legislation keeps us moving forward. Over the past year, we've held 4 statewide elections. The changes that we made in response to the pandemic really resulted in more Rhode Islanders voting in advance of Election Day, either by mail or early in person, than ever before. And in the November election, we saw more voters cast their ballots than in any election in our state's history, despite the pandemic. Now, that means that roughly 2/3 of those votes were cast before Election Day. And I'm thrilled, as your Secretary of State, to see this turnout. And what was interesting was that it was pretty much evenly placed in terms of who voted from home, by mail, early in person, and at the polling place. Now, expanding early in-person voting, including weekends and mail drop boxes, as well as establishing a permanent mail ballot list, will all expand voting access for our state's voters. And I want to say that, similarly to what was mentioned before, I have been told time and time again by Rhode Islanders how much they appreciated the flexibility in being able to vote however they wanted. If you voted in person, you were excited. If you voted from home, you were excited. And if people voted early in person, they were excited as well. People really want to keep those options. Permanently removing the 2 witness or notary requirements to vote by mail will ensure that a voter's ballot and vote remains private and secure. Those are outdated requirements that no longer really need to be there. And they have never really been the security of the election. The security of the election is based on the matching of the signatures, which we still require. The proposal also allows voters whose mail ballots were postmarked by election date to count as long as they're received within 3 days of the general election, which I also wholeheartedly support. And this is something that we already do for uniformed and overseas voters. The bill also requires my office to establish a voter information hotline, which we did for this November in partnership with the United Way and the 211 line. And we fielded more than 3,700 calls in a variety of languages. And it was highly successful and really appreciated by the public. And finally, I want to just speak briefly on the moving of the primary date, which back in 2019, I did introduce legislation to move the primary date to the 3rd Tuesday after the first Monday in August. And I was hoping that we were able to do this so that we could better comply with the MOVE Act, the Federal Military and Overseas Voter Empowerment Act that was passed in Congress in 2009. This federal law requires us as states to send ballots to military and overseas voters at least 45 days prior to an election. So our window was very, very tight here in Rhode Island. The final version of the legislation that passed, as happens sometimes in the legislative process, was not the one I introduced exactly. And so while it does provide a little bit more time, I really do support moving the primary to August, not just for the reasons with regards to the military, but also it would allow us to use schools without interrupting the school calendar. As a working mom, I highly appreciate that. And also for parents who are also running as candidates. It's just, that's a really crazy time of the year at the beginning of September. And it would be a more family-friendly candidate policy as well. So, and I say that as having had to think about those things when I ran. So together, though all of these measures are going to make sure that Rhode Islanders can continue to have safe and secure voting options that enable their voices to be heard in the 21st century. And again, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to give very strong support to House Bill 6003. And I look forward to working with you in getting this important legislation signed into law.
Thank you. Any questions for Secretary Gorbea? Representative Corvese, then Representative Newberry.
Good afternoon, Madam Secretary.
Good afternoon.
Kudos for your work in the archives and securing public records. I think both those bills perhaps need a little tweak, but I think they're both good.
Okay.
Regarding 6003, I have a number of problems with the bill. And I'm not going to delineate all the problems I have with the bill because we'd be here all night, and I don't think anybody wants to do that. But just a few questions. With regard to 6003, what has the Board of Elections said about this?
So I believe they have been consulted on regards to the bill. The bill, as you know, has a number of measures, and I would prefer that you ask the board directly what the board feels on that bill. I've learned over the years not to speak for the Board of Elections, for sure.
Well, I can't speak for the Board of Elections either. I know that they've made statements that they were very happy with the present emergency voting system. I think perhaps expanding it and calling it early voting may be somewhat of a burden on the local city and town canvassers, so I will talk to them about that. With regard to the second page of the bill, and again, this is in no particular order of importance, and this is not all the difficulties I may have with the bill. It says the secretary may partner with entities that are not state agencies to operate this hotline. And you mentioned the United Way. But I guess that would be up to your purview, who outside of the state agencies would operate the hotline. I think something as important as this should be more clearly defined.
Okay, I'm open to discussing that with you in terms of the details of that piece of it. I will say that the advantage of reaching out to the United Way's 211 is that they have the ability to quickly be trained and then address a variety of languages, something that really state government doesn't have the flexibility available in the time frame of elections.
I would be very circumspect depending on what organizations outside of state agencies would be involved with something of this nature. With regard to the removal of the notaries and the signatures, I think you know I have a problem with that. There was a reason why they were implemented, and what I'm hearing, both from yourself and from the Board of Elections, who has a similar, if not identical, piece of legislation, that they have a system in place, but keep with individuals who are examining the signatures themselves. That is still a process that has, I think, some measure of human error. And I don't see where getting rid of the notary and or the signatures makes this any more secure or protected from fraud or the potential for fraud. Now, that word hasn't come up, and that's because apparently there has been, to date, no allegations of fraud having to do with the previous election. But I just feel that taking the signatures away is not necessarily enhancing or increasing security.
I respectfully, of course, as you know, disagree with you in that concern. Having said that, I am very much willing to have some of my counterparts from mail ballot states like Washington State and Oregon, which both elect Democrats and Republicans through mail ballot processes, or Colorado, who most recently did that, that can answer sort of issues and concerns that you might have about removing this on a permanent basis. I do believe that that was a false sense of security for a different time period as well, that we have checks and balances that have been introduced into the system over time and technology in place that safeguard the integrity of our mail ballot system at the local and state levels. And we would be the only other state other than Alabama that would have this kind of requirement on the books still left in the United States.
I did not see it in here, and not being a lawyer, I may not be as facile with reviewing things, but where, if any place, there is same-day registration and voting? Is that in here? It's not?
I don't have it in front of me.
It's a separate bill? Yes. Okay. Okay. I know that within the language of the bill, CVRS has been specifically delineated as the process by which everything is counted, secured, et cetera. I think this was brought up at one of our other meetings when the gentleman from the Board of Elections was here, and it may be problematic to codify into law a particular type of system. So we may have to, if anything like this does pass, we may want to take that CVRS out and redefine it in more general terms so that we don't find ourselves revisiting the language.
Okay, I actually believe that that's just sort of a generic name. It's a central voter registration system. The state of Rhode Island actually owns the code that system uses, but I'm happy to have sort of further conversations with you on that. I don't personally believe that the name, it's not a copyrighted name, it's not a branded name, it is simply a term of use of those kinds of systems. It's a central voter registration system.
Madam Secretary, we had discussed that, and I get the impression that that may have been problematic by definition.
Okay, well, happy to have the look into that and further define it. If I may, Rep. Corvese, if I could just say one more thing, though, regarding the naming of emergency mail ballots versus early in-person voting. The bulk of Rhode Island voters out there really do see this as not an emergency mail ballot process, but an early in-person voting process. There is actually still left on the statute, as there should be, an emergency process, which we used during this time period to let people know that if you had a COVID positive test and you were somehow quarantined, you could still vote through the emergency mail ballot process. To call it emergency in person really confuses voters between the two options.
I think that if we rename it and expand it, then there's no longer emergency, it's early, and we're talking about a different entity. The last thing I'd like to mention today is you have down here a voter access study commission. Tell me what the impetus behind that was and what you envisioned that to do.
So that this bill in particular was the Voting Rights Coalition bill, and so that piece of it was actually not coming from my office. And I would defer to John Marion and some of the other folks on the Let Rhode Island Vote Coalition to be able to answer that, if I may.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for answering my questions. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, regarding the whole impetus behind, the whole concept, rather, of Voter Access Study Commission, I think basically this bill should basically be placed into a study commission, similar to the definition that's here before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Corvese. Representative Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary. I have a comment, a question, and a comment about three different topics. So the first is simply, I agree with Representative Corvese's concerns about the partnering with other agencies. I know George Nee would love to hear me say this, but I think this is something that the state should run. There should be probably more money and more employees if needed. I don't like the idea of outsourcing any aspect of elections to any private entity, no matter who they are or what they do, but that's just a comment. I have a question. It relates to the bill, but it's more of a generalized question. It has to do with signature matching. I registered to vote in North Smithfield in 1999, and I joke every time I go to file my declaration of candidacy that when I fill the forms, I guarantee you my signature doesn't really match what my voting card says. Now, fortunately, I live in a small town, and everybody knows it's not a big issue, but then the last few times I've gone to vote, I forget when we started putting electronic boxes in to sing a sign. I mean, that doesn't look like my signature. And this is a problem with credit card transactions. This is not unique to elections. How does your office and the Board of Elections, how do you adapt to that? How do you deal with that? How do you match signatures that are electronic versus, how does that work?
So you need to ask the Board of Elections in regards to how they do the signature matching. And actually, my office does not per se oversee the matching of signatures in the voting process, what we do is we collect the signatures, we store them in the central voter registration database. The local Board of Canvassers official, for example, on a mail ballot request, will match the signature of the person on the application versus what's in the system for that person. And then the State Board of Elections has its own process for the ballot oath envelope as well. For this particular last year, because of the crush of mail ballots, we actually worked with our software programmer, Stonewall Solutions, to actually create a screen where you could actually see side by side the application signature and the signature in the system. And the clerks, I mean, I think that's a really good question for you to ask the local clerks, because they can tell you exactly how that process works. We just facilitate the storing of the images and making sure that the process is one that they're able to manage at the local level and at the Board of Elections level.
Okay, thank you. I mean, maybe it's a better question for like you said. I've always been curious about this because it's so important to match signatures, and I just, anyway. So my other comment.
I totally agree. I will say that they do hold applications when they don't match, when they have any kind of suspicion, and any of the clerks can come and speak to that issue, as well as the Board of Elections. I mean, there's always a slight difference between the applications received and those that have gone out, and those are under review. Some are held. There's a 7-day time period where the voter is contacted. So we have a lot of procedures in place, and they are used. I know that they're used. They're not just ignored and there's just like rubber stamping going on. That's not the case.
No, actually, I'm less concerned about the rubber stamping. I'm more concerned about how maybe they should reject them all because they don't match, but that's a different question altogether. My last comment is something I think you and I know I've talked to Jason Martesian about this several times. I think you and I may have had a conversation about this. And I'll direct this to the chair as well. I don't personally have a problem with early voting in the sense that, the idea that we should all vote on one day, well, I think it's great. There are people for various reasons can't vote in person on that Tuesday. They work somewhere, their hours, whatever. And I don't have a problem with expanding early voting for a few days, maybe the weekend before. And I also want to say, as a preface to this, that I think a lot of states hold their declarations of candidacy and their primary elections a lot earlier than ours, and I think that's a bad idea. I like the way Rhode Island does it. I don't think election season should be perpetual. I don't think people should be running for president from the moment of the last election. I don't think they should be running for governor from the moment of the last election. I don't think they should be running for state rep from the 2 years of the last election. So I like doing the elections and the election season compressed. I think that's good. The problem is, even if we move the primary date back, it doesn't matter whether it's August or September. And I'm not suggesting, by the way, this is your intention with this bill, not at all. But one of the effects of having a 3-week, I think it is, early voting period, whether it's by mail or in person, in my opinion, is to help incumbents. And the reason for that is when you have more time to get, for people to vote, you compress the amount of time that underfunded challengers can get their message out. Everybody in this room who's elected has been at both a challenger at one point, even if it was an open seat, and an incumbent. Well, most of us have been incumbents at one point. I know when I first ran, I ran against a guy with a lot more money than I had and a lot more organization than I had. I lost that race, not too badly, which is why I ran again, but I lost that race, and I would have lost probably no matter what, but it would have been a heck of a lot harder if I had 3 weeks less time to get my message out. Incumbents in general, there's exceptions, have organizational and financial advantages, and I think the more we compress the amount of time that a challenger has to touch people with those postcards or those emails or those Facebook messages or whatever the technology of the day is, I think it's hard. I really think it has the unintended consequence if we make early voting too long of helping incumbents. And I don't think that's a message we want to send. I don't think it's good for democracy. And the last comment on that point too is, and I think Rep. Corvese touched on this, the town clerks of the two towns they represent have both retired in the last few years, so I know what they think. I don't know what their successors think. But I do know when early voting has come up as a topic in the past, they're sort of horrified by the idea they have to have early. I mean, my town clerk's office has like 2.5 employees. If they have to have someone there for 3 weeks to take, which is what's going to happen, it's a real burden on them. I want to point that out. I don't know what's like in larger cities, but in small towns it's a problem.
So if I may respond, early in-person voting was one of the most amazingly popular measures that we've put into place since electronic poll books. And so I do want to caution the legislature with regards to changing it significantly. The 20 days that early in-person voting it basically took place in last year are the same 20 days. We did not expand it in the legislation last year. We simply took what was originally emergency in-person voting and said it was 20 days then, it's 20 days now. The expansion that I believe this bill and others make is for like the weekend before the election, just to offer a Saturday and a Sunday of voting for families, for people who can't do it during the week. And last year was pretty much the tsunami of elections. If our offices, if our clerks were able to manage, and it looks like they were, because we had 521,000 people vote in November, I think this was a very successful election cycle. And so I would encourage you to really think hard before shortening that time period or making any significant changes to what I think has become an incredibly popular measure. In fact, that's one of the more common questions I get when I'm out in public am I going to be able to early vote again? Because I really, really like that. And I said, no, there was actually a bill passed during the session. That was not done by executive order. That was actually done through legislation. So those are my words on that matter in particular.
No, thank you. I appreciate that's popular, but that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. That's my point.
Thank you. Before we go to Representative Tanzi and Representative Knight, Vice Chair Messier, Representative McGaugh, and I believe Representative Nardone, do you want your presence and votes recorded to hold bills for further study?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Representative Tanzi?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary. I just want to say that I would strongly oppose keeping the misleading designation of in-person emergency. I think that what your bill and the coalition bill proposes is exactly right. We really need to call it what it is. It's in-person early voting, and it is clearly what voters are asking for. And to have someone who actually at the end really needs, like I was door knocking in the last days before the election, and someone said to me, I can't leave the house, my wife is sick, I'm not able to, leave with her, and to try to explain to them that it's a different process. It confuses people, and when they need to use the emergency ballot, it is usually a stressful time. So I think we should call things what they are. In-person early voting should be called that, and then the emergency ballot is used in genuine emergencies where it would otherwise be prohibited for that person to get to that poll who planned on voting that day. And plus, it ignores the way that most people live and work today. It really, I think, it honors people to be able to show that we respect them and honor their right to participate in the election process. There is one technical thing that I just wanted to bring up. Should we pass this omnibus bill, there was one provision, and this is more just to the committee in general, in Chairman Shanley's Board of Elections bill in 5890 that gave very specific instructions on how they would like to have a process to review the signature. So should your bill come in place of one of that other bill, I just wanted to make sure that we carry that process forward, and we have the, fully supportive of the removal of the two signatures or the notary. I sponsored that bill on their behalf, but they did put in a very well thought out process for verifying the signatures, and I think that would put many people at ease in simplifying our voting process the way that you have proposed. So thank you for this bill.
Thank you. Representative Knight, did you still have a question?
Yes, just quickly. Hello, Secretary Gorbea. How are you?
Hi, Representative Knight.
I'm good. So I always get confused, and I may have lost the thread during Representative Newberry's questions. Is the signature verification that we do, is the verification part a human being with their own eyes? Is that one person or two person?
So there's multiple points at which the signature of the voter is verified. The first part is when the voter applies for a mail ballot, they have to sign an application. That signature on the application for a mail ballot is reviewed by the local clerk, and they have procedures locally to verify that, and those are human beings.
And that
now we've
signature is,
simplified it.
that signature is compared
Sorry?
to, that signature, at that first instance, the Board of Canvasser person is comparing that signature to the voter card?
To the signature that we have in the system, whether it be coming from the voter card or from some voter registration.
Okay.
Yes, that happened at the DMV. So this is all done on a computer screen at this point, because we have the technology to do that, and it simplifies it for them because they can look at a number of signatures at the same time instead of one paper, two papers, three papers, sort of going page by page. So that's at the local level. Then at the Board of Elections, they do have a machine that they requested that we were able to purchase with federal funds that will, and this is the same machinery that's used in places like Colorado, Washington State, Oregon, that are all mail ballot states, that looks at the signature on the voter registration system and compares that to that on the oath envelope. And if there are any questions, it puts it aside so that people can actually view those.
Well, wait.
Now, I don't believe that function is working yet at the Board of Elections because we're still matching we're upgrading their systems right now. So for the last year, but you'd have to get the Board of Elections in to verify this completely. It is my impression that for the last, number of years, what they've been doing is they have bipartisan or two people who physically review the signature on the oath envelope versus that in the central voter registration system.
So I want to pause right there and just make sure I heard that clearly, because this all passes pretty quickly for the viewer. So check one is at the clerk's office. Check number two is currently done by hand at the Board of Elections office, but we may upgrade the technology such that it's a machine check. Yeah?
And
using
to
like
a certain
AI?
degree of certainty, and if there's any kind of question, the machine spits out the questions, and those are then hand reviewed. But
Okay,
that was not done in the last election.
Right, we
That's
don't
just
have-
the machinery that they have available.
So we don't have that technology yet.
We have it, but we don't have it functioning. But again, I'm now getting way past my skis, and you should have the Board of Elections come and testify on exactly what they did.
Is there any other checks down the line after that? Assuming in the normal course, not with a problem ballot.
Yeah, no. No, those are the two checks in the system.
Okay, that's
The
good. That's
application
very
and then
helpful.
the oath envelope.
That's very
Yeah.
helpful, just because in all this conversation about voting, that's like the core issue, and it's the thing that I often lose track of. And I will say this just for council, I want to go back to, it's a super minor thing, but it's for real. CVRS is not defined. Those four letters combined are not defined in the current statute at all. They appear once. I just did a check while we were here. And so if we're going to do anything with voting, we should throw CVRS in the definition section because, I'm a good lawyer. I always go to the definition section. So thank you.
Any further questions
okay.
for the
I
Secretary?
did not realize that myself.
Representative Corvese.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if I may, to Representative Knight.
Sure. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Representative Knight, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or the Secretary can correct me if I'm wrong. I think, if I remember the testimony from the Board of Elections a week or two ago, once the machine spits it out, there are two sets of eyes that look at it. If those two sets of eyes conflict in their opinion, it goes to a second pair of eyes.
If I remember the testimony right, that's the procedure they were using this past year, and they want to codify it in the bill they had in front of us.
That's correct.
Right.
But we're talking about two steps with regard to human checking after the machine.
yeah, the machine finds a problem, and then it's referred to human beings.
Any further questions for the secretary? Representative Tanzi, your hand is still up. Do you have any more questions?
No, I will lower it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Secretary.
But I will confirm that is, I was just looking at the bill, that your bill, and that what they just said is true. That's what they were trying to codify with the Board of Elections.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, can I just respectfully add something regarding the voter information hotline?
Sure, go ahead.
Just that, again, historically, the voter information hotline had been done out of our office. It was just the 2020 election cycle was so incredibly overwhelming that it was great to have the flexibility to reach out to 211. It's the only time that we've done this, and it did allow us to do this multilingual sort of capacity building. Rather than constrain sort of future sort of, flexibility like that, I think that there's a way to speak to the training that needs to be provided by the Secretary of State, who at that point will not be me, with regards to it being a nonpartisan administration of elections. We actually had somebody from our office every single day do a review with the team from United Way. So it wasn't like we just sort of outsourced the voter information hotline. There was a total quality management process in place every single day that really helped provide for an improved response to voters seeking information.
Any further questions for the secretary or comments? Thank you. Next, we'll go back to House Bill 5944. There's only one other witness signed up, and that's Steve Brown from the ACLU, and I believe he's available to testify via phone. Good evening, Steve. We're here discussing Deputy Whip Ackerman's bill, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair and members of the committee. Stephen Brown on behalf of the ACLU of Rhode Island. With your permission, if I could discuss both 5944 and 5998, the two Secretary of State archive bills together.
Go for it, Steve.
Thank you. The ACLU strongly supports both of these bills. We spend a lot of time working on the Access to Public Records Act, getting records. What's often ignored is the second part that many of us don't think about, which is, all right, we know who has records, we think. What happens after a period of time? Who makes sure they're keeping the records? And that's what the Archives and the Public Records Administration is all about. It really is a key component of making sure that the public does have access to records all the time. We have a very personal stake in this because of a situation that arose this past year that people in the Secretary of State's office are aware of. We filed an open records request with the major state agency simply asking for copies of 4 years worth, or the most recent 4 years of news releases that this agency had issued. And much to our surprise, they were not able to respond to that request and give us the documents we wanted. They gave us some news releases. We knew there were others because they had posted them on their website. They didn't have hard copies of them. And then we also found out that for the ones that had been posted on their website, they just disappeared after a year or so. They were taken down from the website, and no copy was kept of it, either electronically or in hard copy. It was really quite shocking. So we had a series of correspondence with various agencies, and these bills take some steps in trying to prevent these sorts of things from happening. If you read our written testimony, where we go into much more detail, we do urge the committee, and we also hope to work with the Secretary of State's office to see if these bills can be strengthened to make sure that what we saw happen in this one particular instance is not happening elsewhere, and more importantly, that the Secretary of State's office has the tools to address it when it's brought to their attention. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for Steve from members of the committee? No questions. That will conclude testimony in House Bill 5944. Next, we move to Representative Tabone's bill, House Bill 5753. Representative Tabone is here with us this evening. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman.
Hold this real quick.
Mr. Chairman and members, here to present my bill. Basically, it's to continue to encourage more participation in elections and voting. I have two experts who will speak further on this bill, John Marion from Common Cause and Dan Muse, a former member of the Rhode Island Secretary of State's office. But this bill 5753, sorry. Oh, man. Sorry.
That's okay. If you want, Representative, we can go to the witnesses.
Yeah,
and if
I'd
you
like
wanna
to
come
just go
back
to the
after.
witness. I apologize. I'm having trouble seeing my notes here. But basically, I'm proud to sponsor this bill, and I'll let the two experts speak further on this. Thank you.
Very good. The first witness we have signed up is Dan Muse. Good evening, Mr. Muse. We're here discussing Representative Tabone's bill, and you have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 3 minutes or less. Welcome. Mr. Muse?
Yes, apologies, I couldn't hear it at first. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. You have the floor
Wonderful.
to testify on 5753. Please limit your testimony to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Dan Muse. I am a consultant working with the Center for Secure and Modern Elections, focused on voter registration efforts across the country, and especially with respect to automatic voter registration, which this bill focuses on. Automatic voter registration is an incredibly powerful tool to both encourage and engage more citizens in the electoral process and in the voting process, but also to keep the voting records up to date. The bill that was introduced by Representative Tabone really works specifically to address the way in which data can flow and the agencies that can where data can flow. We recognize that the Department of Motor Vehicles is a powerful tool, but people that engage with DMV, maybe every 3 or 4 years, or when they change their address, and that doesn't always provide the same updates, and it doesn't provide the same updates to the voting list that might occur in other agencies. So, for example, in the Medicaid program, folks need to go in and be redetermined for their eligibility every year. So what that provides is what this bill would provide is an opportunity for those data flows to provide updates to the data to the voter registration system on a more regular basis, a more accurate information into the voter registration system, and would put Rhode Island on a path to increase the accuracy of its voter rolls through updated technology systems and connections between state agencies and the voter registration system, in line with a number of other states that are working on this, including Massachusetts, Colorado, Oregon, New York, and others. So I'm happy to answer any questions. It's great to see so many friends on the committee, having used to be at the State House, and have missed seeing many of your faces. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer any questions.
Second Vice Chair Corvese has a question for you.
Good afternoon, how are you?
I'm wonderful, Representative. How are you?
Good. I think I understand the thrust of this bill, but I am confused about something. On page 2, do you have the bill in front of you?
I do, sir.
On page 2, line 15 to 19, I'm a little confused by what exactly is going on. It says, "Division of Motor Vehicles shall identify each person applying for a driver's license or renewal of it, or a personal identification document." And then it says, "Who provides an identification document with such application that does not demonstrate United States citizenship but does not demonstrate lack of United States citizenship." Now, I'm not a lawyer, but when I see that phrase, I say to myself, well, it's almost like you don't have to prove it, but we're going to accept that you are because you can't not prove it.
Yeah, so it's a great point, Representative, and hopefully I can clear it up. And I know some of my colleagues are also listening in. They might be able to provide some assistance and clarity as well. So as you know, when kind of prior to the Real ID implementation, you did not have to provide documentation that identifies you as a citizen, kind of from the perspective of these are documents that we know meet citizenship guidelines. And a great example of that is military ID. So you could use your military ID to apply for a driver's license and kind of test on your form that you're a citizen. In the Real ID world, that military ID doesn't meet threshold being a citizenship verification document. Because of that,
unfortunately, you're breaking up.
apologies. Let me see. Hopefully, I'll take myself off speaker. Hopefully this works a little bit better. So the military ID that you could use to provide information to allow you to get a driver's license does not meet the standard for citizenship under Real ID. And so what ends up happening is somebody could come in and say, I'm a citizen, here's my military ID, and that kind of we would take, like the DMV would take that attestation as, yes, they are saying they're a citizen, but there's no verification for that. That doesn't create a Real ID. And so what the bill does is make sure that a person that provides information like that does not end up in the voter registration system. So that, what we want to prevent is someone kind of being sent over to the voter registration system without having the appropriate checks to make sure that, yes, they are a citizen. And we do that through Real ID, but there are some ways that we kind of continue to check and renew licenses that do not provide that same level of kind of assuredness on citizenship. So that's why you see that language in there.
Thank you very much for that explanation. In the Byzantine world of legalese, to the chairman and legal counsel, and if the other lawyers here agree, perhaps if this bill were to go forward, maybe that could somehow be cleared up. Am I the only one who feels that language is a little fuzzy? Uh-oh, I see Representative Knight's hand. I guess it's not fuzzy to him.
You've got a friend. Representative Knight?
Through the chair. Down the page, there's that paragraph, which I agree is, you have to read it 3 times. But if you go down the page to line 27, I think that's the cure, right? He says, there's the paragraph basically says, if you give me a document that's good for a license but not good for citizenship, then you can, I need you to come back and certify your citizenship.
Through the chair, Mr. Chairman. Now, that was very succinct, Representative Knight.
Thank you.
Maybe you should write legislation more often.
It's a fun job.
No, seriously, not to be funny, but the way you described it was very succinct, to the point. Perhaps the language here could be tweaked somehow.
Yeah, it can be tightened up. I mean, this bill in general, I mean, if you look at the summary on this bill is providing for automatic voter registration, and the summary doesn't even say it. So I've had to work through it a little bit. But once I've worked through it a couple times, it seems all right. Not that I'm like giving that my stamp of approval, but I see what they're trying to do with this.
Any further questions for Mr. Muse? Thank you, Mr. Muse. Next witness we have signed up is John Marion. Good evening, John. We're here discussing Representative DeBone's bill. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 3 minutes, and feel free to testify on any other bills that you're signed up for this evening if you would like.
Okay, great. Yeah, I will start with Representative DeBone's bill. Thank you very much, which is 5753. I know Dan Muse just testified, and he's really the subject area expert on this. So I'm just going to express that we support the idea of moving to this mode of automatic voter registration, and that we really think it has, 3 benefits. One is that it will be a more efficient process for the government. It will also reduce the errors in the voter roll by reducing the data entry. And then ultimately, from our perspective, the biggest win is that it will result in more eligible voters being registered and more address updates being captured, which is really important for keeping the voter rolls clean. Rhode Island started with online voter registration and then automatic voter registration. And with each step, we're getting our voter rolls more accurate and more clean. And we need to continue on that trend. So we think this is the next step in that. Do you want me to pause for questions there or move on to the next bill?
Sure. Any questions for Mr. Marion on 5753? No, go ahead on to the next bill, please, John.
Okay. So I'm also testifying, and I don't think it's, we've heard from the sponsor yet, but on 6004. And 6004 is by Representative O'Brien. It would extend to voters with disabilities the ability to receive and return an electronic ballot, or receive and return a ballot by electronic means. And Common Cause supports allowing a voter to receive a ballot by electronic means, but we oppose the return of the ballot by electronic means because it poses a threat to the voting system, because the ballot could be intercepted, it could be altered, but it also poses a threat to the voter because the voter can't verify that their ballot was received, but also, and if it was received, if their votes were accurately received without violating the voter privacy. So the technology just isn't there to have what is referred to an end-to-end verifiable system of electronic ballot return. So we recognize that the rights of voters with disabilities are incredibly important, and they deserve the same access as able-bodied voters, but we think this actually, in the name of trying to do that, creates a problem for those voters. The last bill is a bill...
John, before you go on to the last bill, Representative Corvese has a question for you, and Representative Knight has a question for you.
Mr. Marion, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I actually had some of the same concerns you did regarding the return back.
Mm-hmm.
I hope to be here for the testimony on 6004, only because I have another committee meeting. I don't know if we'll get to it. But when I looked into this bill, my fears were allayed on that, and I just wanted to mention that to you. So there is, I think that's a legitimate question, that the return has to be closely protected and scrutinized, as any vote is. The other point I'd like to make is this. if 6004 were to pass, it probably would negate the need in Whip Kazarian's bill to move the deadline of the primary.
So those are both very interesting points, and thank you. I will refer you to our written testimony about 6004, which contains a footnote to a document that was produced by the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security and the National Institute of Safety and Technology and one other federal agency, where they say unequivocally that this is a risk. Despite what the vendors say, we understand that there's a vendor out there that's hired a lobbyist and that they are saying that this is a risk-free method, but the federal authorities who were tasked with examining the electronic return of voters put out a joint statement last summer saying that this is not a risk-free method. There is an alternative that we believe, which is that you have electronic delivery of ballot to the voter with the disability, and then the Secretary of State sends them an envelope, and they return it in the postage-paid envelope. And that would allow the voter to still use their assistive technology, which is what we want to do here. So, for instance, there's a program called JAWS that they can use to mark the ballot and hear the ballot, but then they don't risk the electronic return. So our written testimony has more details on that.
Just very quickly, Mr. Marion, I was not aware that Homeland Security and the FBI looked into this system.
Yes, so the written testimony I submitted has a link to a document that the 4 federal agencies put out about these systems.
About these type of systems?
These types of systems, not this particular product.
Yeah.
There are several vendors that offer this type of product. And to your other point about moving the primary, this product is available to military and overseas voters. We actually don't like that they have to risk their ballot return this way, and moving the primary would prevent us from having to offer this product to military and overseas voters for electronic return. We think it does a disservice to military and overseas voters if they have to return it electronically because they can't have the certainty that something didn't happen to their ballot.
Any further questions for Mr. Marion from members of the committee? Representative Knight.
John, can you tell me, is there anywhere in the United States that has an end-to-end electronic voting system, where the agency sends the ballot to the voter and the voter sends the ballot back to the agency completely electronically?
So there are several vendors out there. The best known is a company called...
John, not vendors. Actual systems in place today by governments.
Yes. So West Virginia uses a vendor called Votes, VOATZ, for certain classes of voters to receive and return a ballot electronically. And, the consensus of the election security community is that we are not there yet. That is a huge mistake, both because it provides an opportunity, it's a threat opportunity for bad actors, and the voter cannot verify without violating their privacy, without, asking the Secretary of State to read their ballot back to them over the phone, which is not what we want. The voter can't verify that their ballot was returned as they voted it.
Okay, so I just want to be clear for the folks watching. To your knowledge, in the United States, state, county, federal, local, there is only one system that is an electronic delivery. Wait a minute, this is the question's coming. There's only one system that provides for electronic delivery and receipt of ballots, and most people think it's a terrible idea.
So in many states, the jurisdiction that runs elections is the county, and there are more than 10,000 counties in the United States. So I cannot say, with certainty, that there are no counties that use that system.
To your knowledge, John.
Yes.
Thank you.
West Virginia.
Any further questions for Mr. Marion on that bill? John, was there one other bill that you wanted to testify on now?
Yes, please. Thank you. So this is on 6003, which is by Whip Ackerman, and we're grateful that she introduced it. And as the Secretary of State said, this is sort of the coalition's bill, and I'm speaking on behalf of that coalition, and you have written testimony that lists the 26 organizations signing on to this. This bill essentially, as the Whip said, puts three modes of voting on par with each other: election day voting, early voting, and mail balloting. And it does that by codifying many of the temporary changes from executive orders, emergency administrative rules, changes in practice, litigation that we engaged in last year. We would just want to emphasize that we've had 4 successful elections using those temporary measures. And we think that if those temporary measures were to disappear, it would negatively affect the hundreds of thousands of voters who voted early and voted by mail. But this bill does more than what we saw from the Board of Elections last week and from Representative Giraldo's bill. Those are sort of the basic fundamental pieces we think have to happen, like getting rid of the excuse and so forth. But there's a lot of mortar that goes, around those big bricks. And this bill, as you know, makes many, many changes, and the written testimony contains, an enumeration of all the changes. But I'll give just 2 examples. 30% of voters roughly voted early in the last election, but about 6 towns provided a weekend of voting. Well, about 33 towns did not. And we think everybody should enjoy the right to vote on the weekend if anybody enjoys the right. So this would put equitable weekend voting in for all communities. The second example is mail ballot applications. So as you heard, this creates an electronic system for requesting a mail ballot and a permanent mail ballot list. That's in place of what we used in 3 of the last 4 elections, which is a statewide mailing of paper applications at a cost of about $500,000 each. So we're looking for solutions here to making ours a better system. So we appreciate everybody else that has put in legislation. We've heard some good feedback from the committee tonight. And we look forward to working with everybody to make this an even better piece of legislation. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Marion from members of the committee? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I do have one question, if I may.
Representative Tanzi?
Yes, Mr. Marion, in Chairman Shanley's bill that was put in by the Board of Elections, I've mentioned this to the Secretary of State, there's a provision that kind of codifies that signature verification process. So should this bill be passed in lieu of the other bills as individual proposals, would you have any objection to including that section? I actually just texted it to you. We're in different parts of the state.
Thank you. I got your text at the very moment I heard your voice. So I will say the board's bill on the signature comparison is different than the signature comparison proposed here. I would say there's 2 important differences. One is that you heard a lot from the Secretary about a machine, and that the state used federal funding to purchase a machine that can do signature comparison. but is not yet using that machine. Our bill, 6003, would allow the use of that machine if the board chooses to, but then require that the board conduct an audit of the machine to make sure it's not producing too many false positives or too many false negatives. It also, if the board chooses not to use the machine, it allows for there to be a process whereby two people review the signatures, similar to what the board proposes, but not identical. Ours errs on the side of the voter. So in their system, if the two people looking at the signature disagree about the match, then the signature is kicked out and rejected. In our system, they would both have to agree that the signatures don't match before it is kicked out. So there are some differences in there. But I think it's notable that our bill would allow them to use the machine, and their bill doesn't even contemplate the use of the machine that we spent $500,000 on. So, I think as we look at modernizing, we need to codify some of those ways we're modernizing, and that's what this bill does.
Thank you. I appreciate that explanation.
Okay. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions from members of the committee for Mr. Marion? All right, next witness we have signed up is Rob Rock from the Secretary of State's office. Welcome, Mr. Rock. We're here discussing House Bill 5783, but you are signed up on a number of other bills, so if you wish to testify on those bills in conjunction with this, feel free to do so.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Shanley and members of the committee. Rob Rock, Director of Elections for Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea. I'm going to testify on 4 bills this afternoon. The first being House Bill 5753. We have not taken a position on this bill at this point. While we have some concerns with aspects of the bill, we've had productive conversations with the DMV, the Center for Secure and Modern Elections, and Common Cause to get a better understanding of its intent. Our main concern is voters are not being notified at the point of transaction about voter registration. It's not until after their name has been added to the voter list that they are contacted and given the option to remove themselves from the list. There is upside, however, especially as we explore options for expanding automated voter registration to other state agencies. We are speaking with election officials from Colorado, Nevada, and Oregon who currently use this form of automated voter registration to understand their experience to see if it makes sense for Rhode Island. While we don't have a position on the legislation, we appreciate the discussion with the sponsors. We look forward to continued conversation to see if we can come up to an agreement on the best approach to automatic voter registration process here in Rhode Island. And Chairman, I don't know if there are any questions in between each bill or just keep going.
It'll be a little while. You can keep going on to the next bill. There's no hands raised as of now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Chairman, if it suits the committee, I'd like to combine testimony on House Bill 5496 and House Bill 5896. They both are related to voter list maintenance. Over the last 6 years, our office has done considerable work to ensure voter rolls are as accurate as possible. More than 160,000 voters have been removed from the voter rolls for a variety of reasons in accordance with state and federal law, and another 83,000 voters have been marked as inactive, which starts the process of their removal. Our office, along with the cities and towns, conduct voter list maintenance on a daily basis. We also receive data from the United States Postal Service of all people who have updated their address with the post office. We contact those voters at both their old and their new address to make sure that they're registered to vote where they should be. We have an electronic connection with the Department of Corrections, where each month we receive a file of voters who have been incarcerated upon a felony conviction, and a separate file of those that have been released from a correctional facility, and cities and towns process those records accordingly each month. In addition, we're part of the Electronic Registration Information Center, ERIC for short, which is a nonprofit corporation governed by a board of directors made up of member states. Currently, there are 30 states plus the District of Columbia that are part of ERIC, in which we all share our voter files and DMV files, and in turn, ERIC provides 4 voter list maintenance reports as often as we request them. In-state duplicate voter report, an in-state movers report, an out-of-state movers report, and a deceased voters report. We send these reports to the cities and towns who act on the reliable data and update the voter records accordingly. The deceased list that we received from Eric is generated from the National Social Security Death Master File, and as it relates to House Bill 5496, our office also receives a list of voters who have died from the Department of Health's Vital Statistics Division twice a month. We send that list to the cities and towns via our voter registration system, where they update the records accordingly. So we are receiving reliable death data from two different sources, the National Social Security Death Master File and the Department of Health's Vital Statistics Division. I believe what House Bill 5496 attempts to do is already in practice today. Regarding House Bill 5896...
Mr. Rock, before you go on to that, I just have a quick question for you. Once a voter is classified as inactive, how long does it take to remove that voter from the voting list?
So that would be, once the voter is deemed inactive, which means a piece of undeliverable mail has come back returned, if they do not vote in one of the next two federal elections, they're removed from the voter rolls.
Thank you. You can
You're
move
welcome,
on
and I'm actually...
to
and I was-
6007.
I'm sorry?
I interrupted you. I was going to say you can move on to 6007. I think we have you signed up on that bill as well.
Yes, sir, and just right before I get to that, House Bill 5896, also with voter list maintenance regarding rules and regulations on canceling voter registrations. I believe that what this bill attempts to do is already in practice today as well. When a voter moves from one address to another, whether it's within the same city or town or a different city or town, and their voter record is entered into the voter registration system, the system automatically identifies all possible matches using information such as first name, last name, date of birth, driver's license number, social security number, or any combination thereof. If the local board of canvassers believes that one of the matches is the same person, they will pull that record from the old address and update the information to the new address. By doing so, the old record is removed from the old address in the old city or town and is updated, but the record is going to contain all of the voters' prior registration information for tracking purposes. So every voter should only have one record in the voter registration system, and every time they move, that record follows them. We also, and to your point, Chairman, if any official election mail is returned undeliverable by the United States Postal Service, the voter is made inactive. Once inactive, if the voter does not vote in one of the next two federal elections, they'll be taken off the list. After each election, approximately 15 to 20,000 voters, inactive voters, are removed for not having voted in one of the last two federal elections. One of the benefits of doing the 3 statewide mailings over the past year is that we've been able to make more than 50,000 voters inactive because of those mailings. One of the concerns that we hear quite a bit is, you know, my son or daughter still receives election mail at my house even though they haven't lived here in 10 years. And the reason why this happens is because when mail's delivered there, if it's not returned undeliverable, if it's just thrown away or ripped up and it's not returned undeliverable, we are unable to make that voter inactive under federal law. So that's why we asked on all of our mailings this year, right on the envelope, we put that if the mailing was sent to somebody who no longer lives at that address, please return it undeliverable. And many folks have done that, and we're cleaning up our voter rolls on a daily basis.
You have a question from Representative Newberry for you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we're kind of jumping around different bills, which I'm fine with because they're similar and it's efficient. I just want to make the observation that my bill, which I haven't introduced, I'm just going to point out, 5896, is modeled on a statute in Ohio, which was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. So it is consistent with federal law. Whether people like it as policy or not is a separate question. And it gets to the heart of the issue that the witness just talked about, which is there's a big difference between sending mail to somebody and waiting for it to come back undeliverable, which is fine, versus continuing to send mail and they never get back to you. And you're going to get a lot more non-voters off the rolls if you follow that procedure, which my bill does, rather than wait for the undeliverable, for the reasons he said. Not everybody's going to mark it and turn it back. I mean, most people aren't going to do that. They're just not. Why would? It's easy to just throw it in a recycling bin and move on. So that's the main point of my bill, for what it's worth, and I think it addresses that issue right there. So.
Thank you. Mr. Rock, do you want to move on to 6007, or did you have more to say on 5896?
I can move on, Chairman.
Okay, very good.
Okay, so House Bill 6007, this is the bill that prevents the Secretary of State from sending mail ballot applications. Over the last 10 months, over 350,000 Rhode Islanders have voted by mail. We believe most of them did so because they felt the process was safe and secure. Voters love voting by mail this past year, and we actually have seen an increase in mail ballots over the last few election cycles, with mail ballot numbers continuing to rise. This was particularly important last year as many voters were uncomfortable voting in person in polling places. Secretary Gorbea believes voters should have choices in how they cast their ballots. While it's not the office's intention to send mail ballot applications in future elections, we think that the office should be permitted to send mailings to voters, just like any citizen or government agency is able to do, to ensure all voters are able to cast ballots in a manner of their choice. It's also important to note that these mailings were made possible using federal CARES Act funds provided to states to address issues related to the pandemic. So our office opposes Bill 6007. And I'm happy to answer any questions, Chairman, whether it's now or directly from committee members at their convenience.
Any questions from members of the committee? Thank you very much, Mr. Rock. Did we cover all the bills that you're signed up on?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you very much. Have a great night. Next witness we have signed up is Sam Oliker Friedland. Good evening, Sam. We're here discussing House Bill 5753. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 3 minutes or less. And if you happen to be signed up on any other bills this evening, feel free to discuss those.
Okay. Well, good evening. My name is Sam Oliker Friedland. I'm Chief Counsel for the Center for Secure and Modern Elections. We work on policies nationwide to make voting more secure, efficient, and inclusive. We tend to focus on voter registration modernization, and particularly on automatic voter registration. So I'm here to testify today in support of H5753. I'd like to start by expressing my appreciation to this committee, this House, Secretary Gorbea, Mr. Rock, and their team, and the other state officials who have worked to make Rhode Island's election system among the best in the country. Rhode Island implemented a form of automatic voter registration several years ago, and we know it has made the voter rolls more complete and more secure. H5753 would take that system and bring it to the next level, helping to keep voter rolls even more up to date, adding even more eligible citizens to the rolls, and increasing protections for ineligible voters. So I'd like to highlight two aspects of the bill in particular. First, H5753 would make it easier to expand automatic voter registration to other agencies other than the DMV that, like the DMV, do a thorough job of verifying client citizenship and other personal information. This is important for providing people who may not have a driver's license or who may interact with those other agencies more frequently with the opportunity to register to vote and update their information. Second, H5753 would move to what we call a back-end model of automatic voter registration. Under this model, an agency identifies eligible citizens, for example, by examining the documents they present or verifying citizenship against federal databases. Then they transmit the information for eligible citizens only to election officials, who then provide the eligible voter with the opportunity to opt out of voter registration. If they choose not to opt out of voter registration, they become registered or their existing registration is updated. This has several advantages. First, it makes the system more secure. By automatically excluding ineligible voters like non-citizens, we avoid putting them in the position of potentially making an error or mistake or checking the wrong box. Second, it keeps the voter rolls more up to date. And third, more unregistered voters can become registered through this more robust system. Colorado is a great example of a state that was recently in the same position as Rhode Island, had a similar system to Rhode Island, and then last year implemented this back-end system. Since implementing, they've seen a 30% increase in new registrations at their DMV, even in the midst of a pandemic that dramatically decreased DMV visits. I'm available this evening to answer any questions you may have, and would just like to reiterate my sort of appreciation and commendation of how well administered Rhode Island's election system is, and we look forward to answering any questions about how we can move the automatic voter registration system to the next level. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Sam from members of the committee? Thank you very much. That concludes testimony on House Bill 5783. Next, we'll move to Representative Lombardi's bill. Representative Lombardi is joining us via WebEx. Representative, you have the floor. Welcome.
These are clean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I will be very quick. This is Bill 5895. What this bill does is enable the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority to work with the Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority to allow computer rail passes to be used as dual passes for both RIPTA and MBTA. As in my neighborhood, many people are becoming more mobile. But without vehicles, they're using public transportation, they're using bicycles, we have many bike paths, and certainly the streets are made to be pedestrian friendly. So what we're asking basically is that the full faith and credit of each state with regard to the passes be recognized. Basically, it would be a reciprocal agreement. And in many cases, as I stated earlier, public transportation is the main source of transportation for many individuals. So it just makes sense. People on fixed incomes, people with due to COVID, some people who lost their jobs or have had their jobs cut, way back. So it just makes sense that, you wouldn't have to buy two sets of passes. So with that, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I will try to answer any questions. Thank you. Appreciate your indulgence.
Representative Newberry has a question for you.
Thanks, Rep. Lombardi. I think it's a great idea. I just have one question. You may not know the answer to it, and maybe it'd be a result of consultation with the MBTA, but there might be financial, I'm assuming the MBTA is not going to want to have their citizens buying cheaper passes. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to figure out a way that this could be not gamed, but people are going to buy the cheapest passes they can. And we're going to have to find a way to work with the MBTA on that. There might be a financial component to it, I'm assuming. Have you given any thought to that, or is there any consideration given to that?
Well, obviously, I've given thought, but, it's certainly once it would be implemented, this would be something with the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority to certainly be part of the negotiation process. Obviously, for me, it just makes sense, again, as people become mobile, as you know, Representative, you're an attorney, I'm sure you travel, to and fro the state of Massachusetts, the state of Rhode Island, for depositions, whatever, and it just makes sense that you can sit on a bus or sit on a train and do what prepare for your business concerns, and not worried about an accelerated price to travel across state line, which is just a couple of miles away in many instances. So yeah, it's certainly a concern. I understand that, but I think it's something that we would be able to work out once the committee or whatever is put together.
No, it's fine. I think it's a good idea. I just was, but the cost is an issue, but it's got,
Sure.
I give some, thank you.
It's a great point.
Any further questions from members of the committee for Representative Lombardi? No questions. Thank you,
Thank
Representative.
you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate it.
Next, we'll move to Representative Roberts' bill, and Representative Chippendale, I believe, is available via WebEx to introduce the legislation on behalf of Representative Roberts. Good evening, Representative Chippendale. Welcome.
Good evening, Chairman and colleagues at the State House and folks who are also at home. This bill is from Representative Roberts, and I am a co-sponsor on it. It's a slightly changed version of a bill that was passed by the House 2 years ago in the 2019 session, where the House, at the time the bill was asking that funeral parlors would report to Board of Elections deceased Rhode Islanders who had gone through their business. The bill before you tonight is a similar bill, only rather than burden a small business with another unfunded mandate, the choice was made to have the death certificate, the creator of the death certificate, which is the Department of Health, send that information to the Board of Elections so that they could obviously take that person off of the rolls, and it would be my hope that something would also be added to that record that would prevent them from reappearing on the rolls, which has happened. There is, and we did hear this testimony 2 years ago, I believe, as well. There is a provision in another section of existing election law that does ask for vital records to be shared. But there was no indication given 2 years ago. There was no indication given that that was being strictly adhered to. So I suspect that's why this bill passed in 2019. It did not pass in the Senate. That was one of the funky years where at the end of the year, a lot of stuff died on the vine. So again, that's the four corners of this bill. It's just a way of using our state's own interagency relationships to maintain the integrity of our voter rolls as it pertains to deceased Rhode Islanders.
Whip, Representative Agello has a question for you.
Certainly.
Thank you, Whip Chippendale, and Chairman Shanley. Representative Roberts and I had a bit of conversation about this bill. In the past, I have heard of situations where father and son have the same name and live in the same household, so at the same address. So I suggested to Representative Roberts that this bill might need to be amended to include date of birth and maybe perhaps place of birth, but certainly at least date of birth, so that we have the age of the person and can be sure that we're not writing someone off the voting rolls who's still alive, the younger son or daughter.
Certainly, that's a great point. In looking at the bill, certainly the death certificate itself would have the date of birth, but I'm not clear that this compels the department to include that. Although, again, in the context of their interagency relationship, I think that date of birth data would be very easily shared with that department. So I do believe that is a good observation, and certainly something that, if it can't be done administratively under the current language of this bill, could certainly be amended if there were an appetite for it. Thank you for the question, Representative.
Any further questions for Whip Chippendale? We have Representative Kennedy.
Thank you. Whip Chippendale. I think this is a great idea, but what I'm interested to know a little bit more about, currently when somebody dies, you need to secure a certain number of death certificates. You know, you've got to give them to insurance companies. You've got to give them to perhaps the local community. So my question would be, in this particular case, is the family going to have to pay the cost of a death certificate to be handed to the Board of Elections? Is this going to be an expense that the family's going to have to be burdened?
Yeah, that's a great question, Representative Kennedy. Thank you for asking it. The way that the bill is written right now, that is not really that's not really a concern, because it's being transmitted electronically. And I mean, let's be honest, when copies of death certificates are requested, and they are often, sometimes you need a couple of dozen of them, because you could have so many life insurance policies, etc. And yes, we do charge people as a state, we do charge people a lot of money for that, because we like to do that. We like to raise revenue to make photocopies. So again, in an interagency relationship, I would like to think that we would not be continuing to overcharge constituents, especially when the vital records are easily transferable electronically and safely between those two departments.
Any further questions for Whip Chippendale? The first and only witness we have signed up is Representative Morgan, who I believe will be joining us via WebEx and is here now. Welcome, Representative Morgan.
Thank you for accepting my testimony. I absolutely support this bill, but I've had a rough day with my mom today, and I actually intended to testify on another bill. Was a tough day, let's put it that way. I do want to make some comments on 6003. One of the issues that I think is terrifically missing in that bill is security of the mail ballots. It talks about having a permanent mail list, and I think this goes to Representative Chippendale's bill as well. If you have a permanent mail ballot list, It means you are sending a live mail ballot out to a list of people who sign up and say, I want you to just send it. I don't want to have to apply for it every time there's an election. Well, if there's dead people on that, I mean, we need to make sure that the voting roll is complete, is accurate. Because when you send a live ballot, and this is the other problem that's wrong with 603, it doesn't outlaw ballot harvesting. You have a locked ballot sent to a permanent list, and if that person is missing, has moved, or has died, then you have a mail ballot that can be harvested and can be manipulated against that person's will. So having that permanent mail ballot list, I think is a really bad idea. I think our voters, if they want to vote, they can take the time to at least apply for a ballot each and every time so that we don't have the ballot security issue. And that also goes, because we don't outlaw ballot harvesting, it also goes to the notary signature, the requirement to have a notary signature and to have witnesses. A ballot harvester can go into some elderly person's home or some vulnerable person's home, stand them. I mean, I heard the statement made that this would give a person who's voting complete secrecy. Nobody else has to see how they vote. But if there's a ballot harvester in their living room, that ballot harvester not only sees how they vote, they can intimidate or manipulate that person to vote. So unless we deal with ballot harvesting, and then that also goes with the secure mail-in ballot boxes, right, that are going to be out all over the place. This is a special deposit vehicle for ballot harvesters. They don't have to walk into the town hall and hand in 40, 50, 100 ballots. They can put them right into a mailbox or a ballot box, and not have anyone see that they are doing it. So the only other thing, I mean, I think those are just glaring errors or glaring deficiencies in 6003. And then I wanted to agree with my colleague, Representative Newberry. I walk door to door, and I actually agree with the early voting. People go in, they have to give their driver's license, there's a positive ID. Oh, that's the other thing. When we have mail-in ballots, we really need to make sure that the voting rolls have been secured with ID. Whether it's, eligible voters have to be citizens, right? They have to actually live in the district in which they are voting. And that's why a voter ID is important. We really haven't tightened up in 6003 the need to have IDs with mail ballots. And then the early voting period is way too long. I walk every day, and I can't get to every house in my district 3 weeks before the election day. And it turns out that by the time I got to many houses, people had already voted, and they hadn't had a chance to talk to me or ask me questions. That's great, I guess, if you're an incumbent. It's not great if you're a challenger, and it's not great for our democracy that people are making decisions without having all the information. So I liked the early voting, but as far as having mail-in ballots that go in 3 weeks before or early voting 3 weeks before, I think it should be shortened. And that's it. But I do support Representative Chippendale's bill because it does seek to tighten up the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Representative Morgan from members of the committee? All right, thank you. That will conclude testimony on House Bill 6007. The next bill we'll consider is from Chairwoman Vella Wilkinson, House Bill 5506. Representative Vella Wilkinson is here. Welcome, Chairwoman. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. House Bill 5506 relating to health and safety, responsible recycling, reuse, and disposal of mattresses. This act would require copies of auditor's documents relative to evaluation and opinion about fees to be filed with the Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation and be considered public records pursuant to Chapter 2 of Title 38, Access to Public Records. Ladies and gentlemen, Rhode Island was the third state in the union to begin state-mandated mattress recycling, and that was covered under General Law 23-90. And they have not released an annual report that includes fiscal information. It's estimated that the state-mandated recycling program, at least when it was first designed, diverted about 65,000 mattresses from landfills annually. When the program initially launched, the fund was $10, and it was a visible recycling fee that was collected at retail from customers on each mattress and box spring sold in the state. When the law went into effect in 2016, as I said, the fee was set at $10, and then it was raised within the last couple of years to $16. Now, the fourth year of program highlights, which was this past year of 2020, MRC, which was the Mattress Recycling Council, a nonprofit organization, based on the law to establish goals to measure the program's performance, provided the following information in their annual report. They collected 82,549 mattresses and recycled 1,271 tons of material. They provided program access in 37 of 39 Rhode Island municipalities. They extended service to 169 other covered entities consisting of retailers, lodging establishments, healthcare facilities, educational facilities, small bulky waste haulers, and others with large volumes of discarded mattresses. They retained participation by 88% of Rhode Island's solid waste service providers, exceeding the goal by 8 percentage points. They surpassed the healthcare facility participation goal, adding 10 facilities for a total of 21 and resulting in 757 units recycled. They recycled 1,512 units from educational facilities and off-campus housing stakeholders, which is a 10% increase from the previous reporting period. They also added 3 lodging facilities to the program and recycled 905 mattresses from 9 hotels. They continue to recycle mattresses collected from Naval Station Newport and its off-base housing complexes, and remained fully operational and prevented service failures despite the rise of the COVID-19 pandemic. By all accounts, this is a highly successful program, and yet this nonprofit organization refuses to provide information that explains any detail regarding the fee. What happens is that the organization has said that the fee is necessary to cover recycling costs, but they don't give us any kind of a fiscal note with regards to how the fee is determined. As I said, when it was initially designed with the idea of recycling 65,000 mattresses, the fee was set at $10. And now, with 82,549 collected in just this past year, in 2020, the fees remain steadfast at $16. So maybe $16 doesn't seem like an awful lot of money to you. I don't know how many mattresses you have in your house, and I don't know how many mattresses our constituents have or plan to recycle in a particular year. But what I do know is that we have a nonprofit organization that is covered by state law that refuses to provide any fiscal information. So they'll tell us the total number of mattresses that they've recycled, and they'll give us the tonnage of materials that's been recycled, but they won't give us any information as to how they came up with that $16 fee. And if they decide to increase the fee next year or the year after, we still won't have any idea why that fee has been increased. Now, in speaking to the organization, they have stayed steadfast away from providing any fiscal information because they feel that that is proprietary information, that the dollar amount that goes into the fee is connected to how much they pay the haulers. Now, many of these haulers will list what their fee is for someone from the general public to have a mattress taken out of their house and disposed of. But MRC will not include that information. So again, what I'm asking is for full transparency with an organization that's providing a service to our constituents by state law and not allowing anyone to understand how they've derived with the fees that they're charging. That's the entire bill for 5506. I'm happy to handle or take any questions. I don't know how well I'll handle. Are there any questions, Mr. Chairman?
Any questions for Chairwoman Bella Wilkinson? No questions. There is one witness signed up on the bill. We have Jared Rhodes from Rhode Island Resource Recovery. Good evening, Mr. Rhodes. We're here discussing House Bill 5506. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 3 minutes or less. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, members of the committee. I really appreciate this opportunity to comment on this bill this evening. My name is Jared Rhodes. I'm the Director of Policy and Programs for the Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation, and I'm speaking to you today as the designee of our Executive Director, Mr. Joe Raposa. By way of background, and although this is not the first session in which this bill has been introduced, it is our first opportunity to testify before this committee, and we are pleased to be here as we feel the central question at hand is truly one of appropriate governmental process and transparency more than anything else. In short, this bill would amend Rhode Island's Responsible Recycling, Reuse, and Disposal of Mattresses Act to require copies of all documents related to the auditor's evaluation and opinion about proposed mattress recycling fees to be filed with the Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation to be considered public records. Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation supports this bill as it would allow for sufficient programmatic insight by the corporation. As was previously mentioned, this level of transparency is currently lacking in key instances and hinders the corporation's ability to meaningfully evaluate the mattress stewardship program's effectiveness and to report back on our findings to the General Assembly as is required by the current law. In addition, please know that Resource Recovery is aware of the Mattress Recycling Council's opposition to the public release of this information, and that we feel we could still effectively evaluate the program and report back to the General Assembly without that provision, provided the reference documentation is still required to be made available to us at a minimum. With that, I'll start my testimony. I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Excuse me, any questions from members of the committee? No questions. Thank you very much. That concludes testimony on House Bill 5506. We're now going to circle back to House Bill 6007 from Representative Chippendale. Mr. Rock testified on this bill earlier, and Representative Chippendale, you have the floor. Welcome again.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman and colleagues. This bill is what it is. It's fairly straightforward. It says that we shall not just blanket mail out applications for mail ballots to everyone. And Rob Rock, who, as his last name indicates, does rock, he's outstanding at his job, testified on this earlier in the hearing. And Rob indicated that it's not the board's intention to do this. It was clearly because of the health crisis in which we found ourselves during the election. And I expect that that's true, or I suspect that that's true. However, there are, in circumstances such as emergencies of this nature, there are opportunities through, as we've painfully learned, executive orders that have the power of law that could certainly allow it in those circumstances. The reason that I had submitted this I think should be equally as clear as the bill itself. But I did receive, at this point, countless interactions from constituents, many of whom had multiple adult children who had moved out. One of the more fantastic stories was a constituent with a daughter who had left Rhode Island 22 years ago for Tennessee, has been voting in Tennessee for 22 years, but yet he keeps getting the mail ballot applications for her and her 3 other siblings. Now, if they were less than scrupulous folks, they could have scribbled the signature of their children on those applications and sent them in. Whether or not they got through, I don't know, although I can tell you I was surprised to learn how many disciplinary notices I had signed for my son in high school that I never even saw. So signatures can, in fact, be duplicated with evidently very little effort. But I digress. So what we clearly want to avoid here is the massive waste of money. And Mr. Rock did point out that this was paid for by federal CARES money. But as I tend to do, much to the annoyance of everyone else, federal money, whether it's CARES Act or any other money, is still taxpayer money. It is wasteful to send it out to people when we know we have such a high percentage of folks who don't live in the state anymore, don't vote in the state anymore, or for many other reasons may still be on the rolls, but don't vote. It is exceptionally wasteful. It invites fraud. And it is a ballot harvester's dream to have a system like that. I think this is, to use a term that flies around the legislature frequently, belts and suspenders. You know, well, let's put it into the law so that it cannot just be done at a whim. It would be something that would have to have some sort of a process or an executive order to articulate the reason why it's being done. I think I have covered all of I've covered all of the points that I have on this, and certainly would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Whip Chippendale? No questions. Thank you, Whip. Have a great night.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate it.
Chairman, I do have one point that I just want to clarify.
Go ahead, Representative Tansey.
It's not just a matter of someone getting a ballot application in the mail and being naughty by returning it. It's a matter of committing a crime that is punishable by law. And there's a huge difference between a 16-year-old signing a disciplinary note, as Whip Chippendale has used as a simile, and committing mail ballot fraud. So I don't want to diminish that the penalty that is put forward in these types of violation of law, that it is a criminal act, and I just felt it necessary to make that point. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, certainly I am aware of the distinction between the anecdote I used somewhat humorously and someone committing a felony. However, I think it's important for us to remember that the jails in the country are filled with people who have no issue committing felonies, and there are people who have demonstrated they don't care what the pains and penalties of the law happen to be. So I am not quite sure the relevance of that point. But thank you again for allowing me to testify on this bill this evening.
Any further questions or comments from members of the committee? Thank you. That will conclude testimony on House Bill 6007. Next, we'll take up 2 bills from Representative Newberry, House Bill 5032 and House Bill 5896, which Rob Rock has previously testified on. Representative Newberry?
Thank you. With respect to 5896, I actually already said what I would have said anyway, and so if there's no other witnesses, I think we can pass on that one. Hopefully we'll vote it out of committee someday, but for tonight, I think we're done. But I want to address 5032. So this bill, as a brief history, this issue came to me, we had a constituent in the fall of 2019 approached me with an issue. We met with legal counsel and the Attorney General's office. I'll explain the issue in a minute. We met with legal counsel and the Attorney General's office in January of 2020. Came up with some proposed solutions to the problem that my constituent brought to me, came up with a bill that at the time, my understanding, the Attorney General's position was they didn't support or oppose it. They could live with it, essentially. And then we had a hearing about 1 week before everything went to hell with COVID last March before judiciary. So obviously it died then. The issue is this. My constituent, and he was there, he was here a year ago, he testified in person. I don't know exactly the reason, but there's a reason he can't make it this year. And he's not able to telephone in either, but he's still interested in the bill. So I'm going to essentially replay what he said last year. He had gone to a town meeting, I forget what it was, planning board, one of the boards, maybe it was a special commission, something governed by the Open Meetings Act. He was the only person in attendance. The board went into executive session for about 3 hours. They came out of executive session and they were there for another around 10 minutes. He felt that it was intended to avoid having to interact with him. Now, I probably know all the people on the various boards and my constituent. I'm not getting involved in this issue myself, but that's what was relayed to me. If that situation did occur, he questioned whether there were open meetings violations going on in executive session. Here's the problem. When you make an open meetings complaint to the Attorney General's office, they have to make a determination whether to pursue it. They decide whether to pursue that in part upon the meeting minutes. And under existing law, what goes on in executive session is simply recorded in the meeting minutes. In this case, he told me the meeting minutes were very short for a 3-hour executive session. He questioned whether they were accurate. So that's what leads to this bill, which will require recordings of executive sessions. That way, the Attorney General can review those recordings if a complaint is brought and they feel there's need or good cause to do that, to see if it gives them evidence on whether or not to pursue the violation. I know the ACLU has submitted written testimony. I don't know if anyone signed up to testify, Mr. Chairman, live, but Steve Brown did submit a letter. My understanding was they take the position that these recordings should be considered public records. My bill specifically says they're not considered public records. I don't personally have a strong feeling about that, but the point of executive session is to keep things not a public record. So I'm not sure that the ACLU's position on this is consistent with the intent of executive session. But that's just my opinion. I don't have a strong sense on it. But I do think the issue my constituent raised is a valid one. If you have a local board or commission that's violating the open meetings law through improper executive sessions, there has to be some evidentiary basis for the Attorney General to move forward. And right now, there really isn't if the meeting minutes are, not consistent. And I'll leave it with that.
Thank you. Any questions for Representative Newberry on either bill? That concludes testimony on 5032. Next, we'll go to Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy's bill, or House Resolution 6002. I believe Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy is available to testify via telephone, and
Yes.
Secretary of State Gorbea is also going to be testifying on this bill. Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. So this is a special legislative commission to be known as the Rhode Island Semi-Quincentennial, or the Rhode Island 250 Commission. If you remember, for those of you who were around in 1976, we had the bicentennial celebration in Rhode Island, and each town did something special. And I think for some of the smaller towns in the state which didn't have a town flag, many of the communities actually created a town flag at that time as part of the celebration. This creates a special legislative commission, which would consist of 30 members, which would include the Secretary of State, the Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education, the Executive Director of the Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission, the Executive Director of the State Council for the Arts, also the Secretary of the Executive Office of Commerce, and then the Historian Laureate, as well as numerous public members that would be appointed by the Speaker of the House, the Minority Leader of the House, the President of the Senate, the Minority Leader of the Senate, some from the Governor, and of course some from the Secretary of State. We have all states across the country that are looking to begin this process of creating a special commission such as this, and hopefully Rhode Island's part of the 250th anniversary of our country will be just as great. So we bring this forth to the committee and hope to be able to move this forward this legislative session.
Thank you very much, Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy. Any questions from members of the committee? No questions, then we will go back to Secretary Gorbea. Welcome back, Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and of course, thank you to Representative Kennedy for introducing this resolution on our behalf. You know, I just want to, I mean, the beginning of this resolution is really amazing, and it's one of the reasons I love Rhode Island. We are one of the original 13 colonies. We played a leading role in the birth and history of the United States of America. They could not be a really good 250th celebration in this country if Rhode Island did not participate fully in it. And look at these facts. On June 9th, 1772, in the first major act of rebellion against England, Rhode Islanders attacked and burned the Gaspee. In 1774, Providence residents were the first to propose the idea of a Continental Congress at their town meeting. On May 4th, 1776, the General Assembly passed the Act of Renunciation, becoming the first British colony to renounce its allegiance to the King, which is an important legislative step towards the Declaration of Independence, which was signed a few months later. So this is just, you know, there is no 250th, in my opinion, without Rhode Island having a proper role. And it's a really great opportunity to highlight for the rest of the country what an important role we've played. So states are establishing these commissions under the umbrella of a national commemoration organization called America 250th. We already have had some informal stakeholder meetings, so there's a lot of interest across a number of communities, including not just the historical societies, but also the hospitality and the tourism industry. This can be a real economic development opportunity for the state of Rhode Island. But in order to do this, we have to get ourselves all under sort of one big umbrella, and that's what this resolution aims to form in terms of this commission. The committee should have received a letter of support from the national organization, that's America 250th, and so this is what we're here to do. You know, this is a real opportunity for leveraging cultural tourism in our state, and so I want to particularly urge the General Assembly to commit some funding to the commission. State funding will support the work in a way that helps us develop the statewide partnerships that the commission can facilitate and share resources, such as having one RI 250th logo and an RI 250th state website, like we've done in other celebrations. You know, Pennsylvania's already created such a thing, and I just want to make sure that they don't get to rewrite the history books all over again, like Massachusetts and Pennsylvania did, and keep us out of it, basically. So I ask for your support of House Bill 6002 so that we can ensure that Rhode Island is fully represented in the 250th anniversary of the founding of our nation.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Any questions from members of the committee? No questions. Thank you again. That will conclude
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Testimony on House Resolution 6002. The next bill we'll move to is from Representative or Chairwoman Fogarty. That's House Bill 6006. Chairwoman Fogarty is available to join us via WebEx. Good evening, Chairwoman.
Good evening, Chairman. Thank you very much, and to the rest of the committee, good evening. I'm here to talk about House Bill 6066, and this is an online driver's education program pilot, and this is for 33 hours of driver's education that offered online or virtually, and then it will be looked at too by a study commission that will review the success of this. This is going to have, it has a sunset period of time. This will go from October 1st of 2021, October 1st of 2023. Again, this is not taking over classroom phys ed training. They're more than welcome to join and do the virtual. It's really kind of due to the whole COVID situation and making sure that our 16-year-olds can take courses regarding, learning to drive. It's the most important thing in the world to anybody who's 15 or going on 16 really. But they all live for it. So we're not asking to stop having classroom. This is just virtual, and some people might feel more comfortable doing that in this time really due to COVID. So again, there would be looking at a study commission after they were asking to include a representative from AAA, one staff member from the Community College of Rhode Island Driver's Education Program, the director of Rhode Island Division of Motor Vehicles or a designee, and one certified driver education teacher appointed by the Speaker of the House of Representatives and the director of the Rhode Island Office of Highway Safety. So again, if this works out well, it might be something that we can continue into the future in the state of Rhode Island. And I know that I heard a lot from my constituents besides, COVID and vaccination. I have a lot of kids in the neighborhood who were worried about getting their driver's license and then also about taking the test at the DMV, and then that wasn't available for a period of time. So a lot of anxiety with 16-year-olds around this particular subject. So with that, I'll take any questions that the committee might have.
Any questions for Chairwoman Fogarty? Representative Messier.
Hello, Representative. So when they take these courses virtually, what about the instructors? Are there going to be just as many instructors as if they went to a classroom setting?
There could be one instructor, there could be multiple instructors. It's really up to the people who want to teach these virtuals. And I suggest that any of the people who do the classroom drivers training, if they want to go and be part of this, they certainly can be.
Okay, because I know quite a few people who teach that, and I think they'd like to continue the classroom whenever they can, instead of waiting till 23. So I hate to see people who count on working on this for pay to lose that income.
Yeah, again, it's sunsetted, so if it doesn't work out, it ends in October of 2023. But at least it's something, who knows what's going to happen in the next period of time, but at least we have the virtual as an option. And it says current approved providers of classroom driver education may offer the 33-hour driver education program in an online or virtual format. So it's suggesting that they can do this too.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Any further questions for Chairwoman Fogarty? Thank you, Chairwoman. The first witness we have signed up is Amy Antonevich. Good evening, Amy. We're here discussing Representative Fogarty's bill. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 3 minutes or less. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. My name's Amy Antonovich, and I am calling just with some comments on this particular bill. I am a certified teacher, and I have been teaching driver's education for some time now. I teach at Levante's Auto School, which is actually a school that's certified to teach the Rhode Island students. We have had the opportunity to kind of already test out this, remote situation because we weren't able to provide classes in our facility due to the COVID shutdown. So we've gone to classes that are currently done over Zoom. My concern just about the particular bill, the way it's written, is that it says, they would allow for an online or virtual. And I just would want to be certain that whatever classes would be approved would be actually taught by a teacher and would be, a virtual classroom as opposed to some online programs that are actually just kids logging into a computer and going through slides. We've found that through the Zoom teaching, there are some requirements we need to meet. We need to have a live teacher who's certified. We need the kids to be visible on the webcam. This way we can engage the students in discussions and really be sure that they're learning all of the material appropriately. And also we can give live, quizzes and correct papers and correct them and so on. And they can ask questions. So we think that this is, really important to include, and that it wouldn't just be an online program without a teacher. So those are my remarks. For the most part, I know there was a commission. I would wonder as well if it would be possible to have, a representative from maybe our school or, elsewhere, we have a lot of experience in this. We've been teaching the Rhode Island students for many, many years. So we feel we'd have a lot of important input as well.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the committee for Amy? Thank you very much for your testimony. The next witness we have signed up is Lloyd Albert. Good evening, Lloyd. We're here discussing House Bill 6006. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 3 minutes or less. Welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to testify. Let me just shut down my my computer here so to make it easier. I'm a senior vice president at AAA Northeast. Our club operates in 5 Northeast states, and our company headquarters is here in Providence. And we employ over 1,600 people in the state. And while most people associate us with emergency road service, we have several other business lines, including the successful driving school. So we've been teaching young people how to drive safely now for over 80 years in Rhode Island. Over the past several years, we've been advocating for this law, for a law like this one, that allows the 33-hour teen driving curriculum to be offered online in addition to the in-person classroom program. In the past, there has been some opposition to doing so, probably because people thought it just wouldn't work. Well, the pandemic has certainly changed that. Not only have the folks offering the program at CCRI and driving schools like AAA and Newport County Driving School successfully transitioned to virtual instruction, but they've done so with great success. In our case at AAA, we have seamlessly pivoted to the online world and successfully conducted virtual classes for over 1,200 students now, most of whom have gone on to get their Rhode Island driver's permit on the road to becoming responsible young drivers. So what we've heard from both students and parents over the past year is that they place a high value on the choice and convenience that an online program offers. In terms of equity, we have kids living in underserved communities can now avail themselves of quality instruction from the comfort of home. The beauty of this bill is that the state can now offer viable alternatives to families not previously available. In surveys that we've conducted recently, parents and teens both tell us that their online experience has been very positive. As for the quality of instruction, I think this is very important. Results on the permit exam conducted at the end of the program are comparable for the online learners compared to teens who took the in-person classroom. So a very important consideration in terms of quality instruction. So although we've had significant success with the virtual program, we think it's wise to move forward judiciously at this time on this initiative, which is why we support a 2-year period where the interested parties can evaluate the efficacy of the online program. And I'm confident that results will demonstrate that consumer choice, convenience, and the potential for lower program costs, will make this a permanent fixture in the state's driver training portfolio, just as it has in 27 other states across the country who've already been doing online learning. Special thanks I want to give to Representative Kathy Fogarty for sponsoring the bill and for the great list of co-sponsors who've signed on to the bill, including representatives from law enforcement, the law enforcement community, and my own state rep, Representative Carol Hagan-McEntee. So I know time is short. I will stop there, but I'm happy to answer any questions from the committee, and I want to thank you very much.
Any questions for Mr. Albert from members of the committee? No questions. The last witness we have signed up on this bill is Jeff Taylor. Good evening, Mr. Taylor. If you could turn down your video feed.
Yep.
You have the
Thank you,
floor
Mr. Chairman.
to testify. Please limit your testimony to 3 minutes or less. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jeff Taylor, and I am speaking on behalf of AAA Northeast in support of Senate Bill 6006, and I want to thank Representative Fogarty for the introduction of this bill and the committee's attention to this issue. I know Mr. Albert gave you a good overview of the program and what's being proposed here. If I could, I'd like to address a few questions that came up during some of the previous testimony. I think one of the members of the committee, I think it might have been Representative Messier, had asked about the issue with regard to teachers, and I believe that another witness had inquired about whether or not the term virtual would mean whether or not a teacher would be included. In the law itself, it does reference existing statute 31, 10, 19, and 20, of which in that statute it actually says that a person eligible to teach with a driver's ed certificate must be required to teach the course. So it actually references a statute that already includes the requirement of a teacher, a certified teacher, to be able to teach this course. So a virtual course would not circumvent any required personal teacher to be part of the course being offered. One of the other mentions too, and it was decided that they wanted someone on the board who represented a driver's school. In the actual language of the bill, there is a requirement that there's a certified driver education teacher to be on that particular task force to evaluate this program during the pilot period. So, and lastly, I just want to mention, on a personal note, I am the parent of an 18-year-old who had to take the driver's ed courses in person before they were available during a pandemic, and I'm also a parent of a 16-year-old who took it online, and I can tell you from a parent's perspective, having it available online was a great convenience, given the number of hours required by a student to travel back and forth and some of the logistics on getting kids to the classroom at time. And, I can tell you that both of them are very good drivers, one taking the class in person and the other, and they've all successfully passed their required tests and are very good drivers in the state of Rhode Island. So I can attest to having both gone through both programs and successfully completing both. Happy to answer any questions if there are any. And actually, Mr. Chairman, if I could, I do have a quick question. I was signed up to testify on behalf of House Bill 5506, and I didn't get called, so I don't know if I have the ability to just add a few comments on that particular bill.
Yes, you can certainly add a few comments on 5506.
Okay, great. Thank you. On 5506, just quickly, is the bill that was introduced making some changes to the mattress recycling program. And I am representing the Mattress Recycling Council, the entity responsible for the program in the state of Rhode Island. And I want to thank Representative Bella Wilkinson on describing the program and the success that it has hit here in Rhode Island since it's been in effect since 2016 to keep mattresses out of the landfill, and what was it, and the intention was in putting the producers of mattresses responsible for those products to keep them out and recycle them. Actually, the one issue, I do have a written comment made, and I'll just briefly reference the fact that we actually do share a good amount of information with the Resource Recovery Corporation when it comes to the financials, and we are very supportive of this legislation with one minor amendment, and that amendment would be that the language in the bill reflects the current language in the Rhode Island Access to Public Records Act, and that simply says that any information with regard to trade secrets or commercial or financial information of privileged or confidential nature would be not available to the general public. That's taken directly out of General Laws 2390, which actually references, Chapter 238, which actually is the Open Records Act. So that is just codifying in this section of the law the language that protects some of that information that's currently in existing public to access record law. So if that amendment were to be adopted, we would be very supportive of the bill and sharing all the information required by the government entities that have oversight of this program. I'm happy to answer any questions on that issue also.
Any questions from Mr. Taylor? Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. That will conclude testimony on House Bill 6006. We now move to Leader Filippi's bill. And Leader Filippi is here with us. It's House Bill 5894. Welcome, Leader, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. I think this is the 7th year I've put in this bill, and it's different this year. So what this bill requires is that any open meeting of state or local government must be live streamed to the internet. A copy shall be available for inspection, and a copy shall also be transferred to the Secretary of State for storage. We also envision that a copy of that video will be posted to the internet for any future public consumption. Now, when I first put this bill in, I received calls, emails, phone calls from people in government saying, it's going to be way too expensive, we don't have the technology, we don't know how to do this, we don't know how to train our clerks, we can't put this burden on people. One of the good things that we've had come out of the tragedy of COVID-19 is we have massively opened up our government in ways which I think we cannot go back on. Families work hard, people work hard. Sometimes they can't get to their town council meeting. But you know what? They can cook dinner for their kids with the computer on and watch their town council. I think we set an example in this house by streaming all of our meetings. It's a wonderful thing to see. When I first came up here, I felt that all entities of government should be doing the same thing. So what this bill does is essentially makes all other government entities as open and transparent as we are. And the arguments that it's not possible anymore have simply been disproved by experience. We cannot go back on the open government we've achieved over the past year. This ensures that we don't. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we'll take any questions if people have it.
Any questions for Leader Filippi? No questions.
Thank you, Chairman. It's been an honor.
Thank you very much. Next bill we are going to move to is House Bill 6001 from Representative McLaughlin. There's one witness signed up to testify. It is Julie Hamill from the Rhode Island Judiciary. Is Ms. Hamill available? Good evening, Ms. Hamill. We're here discussing Representative McLaughlin's bill. You have the floor to testify. Please limit your testimony to 3 minutes or less. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Shanley and members of the committee for this opportunity. My name is Julie Hamill. I am General Counsel to the Rhode Island Supreme Court, and I would just like to briefly speak to you about House Bill 6001 and explain why the judiciary asked that it be introduced. Essentially, this bill would amend 1535, which is the statute empowering certain state officials to join people in marriage. And there are essentially two amendments we're seeking. The first is to add the administrator of the Supreme Court as an individual authorized to perform marriages. And the second is to clarify that current administrators of all courts within the unified judicial system are likewise authorized to perform marriages. The statute currently makes reference to former administrators being authorized to do so, and we're simply seeking a clarification that current administrators are likewise authorized. So those are all my comments on House Bill 6001. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I also have two other bills that I would like to speak on this evening, and I'm happy to wait, or I can address them now.
You can address the bills now. Just give us the number and the name of the primary sponsor so people can follow along.
Sure. The second bill is House Bill number 6095, and that bill was sponsored by a host of representatives, Felix, Representative Williams, Representative Henrys, Representative Alzade, Representative Potter, Representative Tanzi, Representative Baginski, Representative Bayros, Representative Diaz, and Representative Morales. And I thank all of those sponsors, in addition to Representative McLaughlin on the previous bill, for introducing this on the judiciary's behalf. So with respect to House 6095, as the committee is aware, Rhode Island voters approved a constitutional amendment on November 3rd, 2020, removing the phrase "and Providence Plantations" from the state's name. House 6095 strikes all references of the term "and Providence Plantations" from all statutes pertaining to the judiciary. These include statutes relating to court seals and a variety of documents and forms such as juror notices, oaths, subpoenas, writs, summonses, and complaints. All told, there are about 24 statutes that are amended by this bill, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on that bill if anyone has them.
Any questions for Ms. Hamill? No questions. Thank you. Is there a third bill that you're signed up on?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it's number 6096, and that was sponsored by Representative Noré, Representative Casimiro, and Representative Alzade, and I would thank them for introducing this on behalf of the judiciary. This bill was requested by the Traffic Tribunal, and it will clarify that violations of Chapter 31, Section 34 of the general laws, which pertain to rental vehicles, are subject to fines and are not misdemeanors. So currently the statute does reference violations of those sections as being misdemeanors. We want to clarify that they're actually civil violations subject to the jurisdiction of the Traffic Tribunal. And with that, the bill also adds the appropriate fines to the schedule of violations, which is contained in 3141.1-4. So that is all I have on that bill.
Thank you very much. Does that conclude your testimony on all bills for this evening?
It does, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chair Shanley, I do have one question for the administrator if she's still on the line.
I'm here, yes, thank you.
Excellent. Go ahead, Representative
Thank
Tansey.
you. On 6001, the one by Representative McLaughlin, are these administrators or clerks or judges allowed to charge a fee? I didn't notice any mention of that in the bill itself for the service.
I don't think that the statute does address the charging of fees. And I don't know. I know anecdotally that sometimes a judge or other official may charge a fee, but it's not set by statute.
All right, thank you.
Any further questions for Ms. Hamill from members of the committee? Thank you very much, Ms. Hamill.
Thank you.
Representative McLaughlin, did you want to introduce and make any comments on 6001? Yes. Go ahead. You can use the podium if you're comfortable there.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you so much. House Bill 5863, in reference to bringing the General Assembly back in terms of emergencies, crisis. What we experienced in 2020.
Rep, I think you might have the bill for your Judiciary Committee you might be testifying on. I know you have a couple bills in different committees tonight.
Okay, which one are you referring to?
6001, an act relating to domestic relations, solemnization of marriages that you introduced on behalf of the Supreme Court. Ms. Hamill testified on it from the Supreme Court. She's legal counsel for the Supreme Court earlier.
On the solemnization of marriages, I had inquired about that bill, okay? I don't know whether there was a mix-up in ledge counsel, but I don't ever remember putting in a bill like that.
Okay.
Okay. I wanted to check with Bill Connell, on ledge counsel, but I don't believe that's my bill.
All right. Well, it's got your name on it, so we'll have to get that sorted out.
I appreciate it, but solemnizations of marriages, I don't have a problem with, if it's...
This would just give a Supreme Court, or family court, district court, traffic court tribunal judges the power to perform these marriages.
Don't they already have it?
I guess not.
Really?
And hence the need for the legislation.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay.
All right.
With that having said, do you want to keep your name on the bill?
That's fine, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Well, that will conclude the most interesting hearing of the night. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yes, any questions? I'm sure there are a lot.
Oh, okay.
All right, thank you, Representative. The next bill we're going to go to is House Bill 6004 from Representative O'Brien. I'm not sure if Representative O'Brien is available tonight or in another meeting, but I will introduce the bill and then we'll go to some witnesses. This is an act relating to elections and mail ballots. It entitles disabled and military voters to utilize electronically transmitted ballots.
Chair.
Mr. Rock and Mr. Marion testified on this previously.
Okay.
By way of introduction. There are two other witnesses that are signed up on this bill. We have George Zania and Robert Marshall. Is Mr. Zania or Mr. Marshall available? Good evening, Mr. Zania. This is Evan Shanley from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We are discussing Representative O'Brien's bill, and you have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm happy to testify on behalf of Representative O'Brien and Baginski's bill to improve access to mail ballots and strengthen voter rights. As you'll see, it's pretty straightforward. The proposed modification, if you went to page 2, you'll see that the current law allows for overseas and military voters to have to vote by facsimile machine. And this legislation would modernize that process to allow for it to be electronically transmitted at both ends with the 3 approvals that would be necessary, the 3 standards of the Secretary of State's approval, the NIST standards of approval, and independent security reviews. I was able to hear some of your testimony earlier, and there were some questions about the safety and security of voting, and certainly there's nothing riskier than transmission by fax. As most of you will remember, whether it was a smudge on the glass or a smudge on the paper, it's hard to read. This certainly would make it a more secure and safer way to vote. Again, Representative O'Brien and Baginski have done a great job here. The other part of this is about folks with disabilities, and that the current law allows with folks with disabilities to vote by an absentee ballot, as you know. However, voters that are blind or have palsy or Parkinson's, paralysis, or any number of disabilities can't mark a paper ballot privately or independently. And this modification and modernization of the Voting Act will enable voters with disabilities to access and mark a mail ballot in a secure and private and independent manner, just like most of everyone else who votes at the polls. I know you all know that equal access to voting doesn't stop at the polls, and I'd appreciate it if you consider that as you would deliberate and hopefully vote for Representative O'Brien and Baginski's bill. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zania. Any questions from members of the committee? No questions. Thank you again for your testimony. Next witness we have is Robert Marshall. Good evening, Mr. Marshall. We're here discussing House Bill 6004. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 3 minutes or less. Welcome.
Chairman Shanley, I'll be very quick here on behalf of the Rhode Island Developmental Disabilities Council. We were very happy to see this expansion of using electronic means to fill out ballots for people that are disabled. As the witness just before me was saying, people that have mobility problems with their hands or sight problems until now have to have someone assist them with their ballot. And most times that's not a problem, but sometimes people feel they need to help the person vote the right way, and that's not a good thing. We think that as long as the issues that Common Cause raised around security can be addressed, or even the suggestion that they get to fill out the ballot this way and then just need to mail it back, be a good interim step if we can't address those security issues sufficiently right now. We can do that as an interim step, and then as soon as that can be addressed, which I'm sure someday it will be, we can move to this. So thank you. I'll take any questions.
Any questions from members of the committee for Mr. Marshall? No questions. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
That will conclude testimony on House Bill 6004. As a matter of housekeeping, there are no other witnesses signed up on Representative Noray's bill other than Ms. Hamel, who we heard from earlier. So that concludes testimony on House Bill 6096. Representative Felix is with us, and I'm not sure if she has anything else that she wanted to say on House Bill 6095. I know Ms. Hamel also addressed that earlier. Representative Felix, do you have anything you want to add to Ms. Hamel's testimony?
No, Mr. Chairman. She mentioned everything regarding the bill. Thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you. That will conclude testimony on House Bill 6095. Next, we'll move to Representative Batista's bills, and we're going to start with House Bill 6005, an act relating to public records, access to public records. And Mr. Batista is here live with us tonight. Welcome, and thank you for your patience.
I never really know how to work this thing, so I always got to check.
It's counterintuitive. You push it up to turn it on.
And Secretary Gorbea covered 5998, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to present this bill. It is an update to our Access to Public Records Act, and this amendment is modeled after a bill that was passed in New York State last summer. And for anybody who's curious, that bill was known as 50A, 50 letter A. And basically the first 15, it looks like it's 24 pages, but really the first 15 pages are just references to other parts of the bill. What this does is clarify what law enforcement disciplinary records are, and then discusses the process by which they can be released. Current practice is very muddy, especially between the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights and the APRA law. There's some confusion as to what it is that's allowed to be public versus what is not. And it is not uncommon to submit an Access to Public Records Act and have it essentially denied on the grounds that it conflicts with the LEA Board. And I know that there are efforts to reform the LEA Board now, especially with Chairwoman Williams submitting a bill yesterday. And so what this bill does is try to reduce that confusion and clarify what it is that can become public. And so it defines, if you are on page 15 of the bill, describes what it is that would become public, and this is specifically any documents related to any disciplinary hearings. So the name of the police officer would become public, the complaint and the allegations therein would become public, the transcript of any hearings for the disciplinary hearing would become public, and ultimately the disposition of that hearing would become public. And the reason is just from a public policy perspective. Police officers, like any other government employee, we have an interest in making sure that they're doing the right thing. And if there's some sort of disciplinary mechanism going on, we should be able to have access to that. It's not that these documents are going to become public automatically, but they are subject to public records requests, and this clarifies which documents would be able. The bill does also protect the privacy of police officers. For example, their address, if you look on page 17 and 18, there's a list of things that cannot be released. Their address, phone number, social security number, medical treatment, mental health records, all of these very private, personal things would have to be redacted. And so the effort is simply to clarify the Public Records Act. This is something that New York State did recently, and I know other states have done in the past, and I appreciate the opportunity to put this bill forward.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the committee? Representative Knight.
Thank you. Thank you, Rep. Batista. I think this is an issue that needs to be resolved. But I'm wondering, so if I read this, and just tell me if I got it right, any complaint with the appropriate redactions would be public record, no matter the result of the finding on the complaint. Is that right?
The result of the final...
What I'm seeing here is any complaint would become public after redacted. Any complaint, even crazy complaints.
If someone were to make a public records request for them.
If someone were to make it, well, I can imagine, I mean, if we were to pass this bill, there would be people out there who would make it their habit to, once a month they request the records so that they, because of accountability. And of course, the criminal defense bar would be all over this, requesting records like a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm fine. I like open records. I like sunshine, but I'm just trying to see if I'm reading that right. So this bill, as drafted, would make any complaint public record.
Yeah, and to the extent that we're worried about a baseless complaint becoming public,
right,
it would also include the disposition. And so I assume if the police department receives something and it doesn't have any merit, it would indicate that as well.
So what I'd be concerned about is something getting released as a public record in the middle of resolving the complaint, one way or the other, doing the investigation, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and so maybe the solution is to add language.
Yeah, just until it's resolved one way or the other.
Yeah.
Either a finding of, no basis by the police department, or it's sustained, or whatever it is. Because I think listen, law enforcement's going to get complaints that have no basis. I mean, that's the nature of the beast. So if we're going to release a disciplinary complaint against an officer, Joe Blow, that had no basis, it should have no basis right next to his name. And on the flip side, if something's sustained, it's sustained, and that's a different issue.
I agree with that. It certainly makes sense to add language to do that.
Thank you.
Any further questions from members of the committee? Representative Agello.
Not so much a question as a comment. Representative Batista, perhaps some great minds are working on the same issue. At the request of the ACLU, I introduced legislation aiming to have the same effect, and that legislation was heard a week or so in Judiciary Committee. So perhaps we can work together to get one of them done.
Sure, absolutely. I did notice that. Absolutely.
Any further questions or comments for Representative Batista? Thank you. We have one witness signed up on 6005. Paul Valletta is live from Cohasset tonight. Good evening, Mr. Valletta. Welcome.
Good evening, Chairman. Thank you, and members of the committee. The Rhode Island State Association of Firefighters is in opposition of 6005. Firefighters, to my recollection, have never been designated as law enforcement in the state of Rhode Island, in state law. In several chapters of present state law that pertain to police and fire, the definition of both are always separate. This legislation defines firefighters as law enforcement when it pertains to two sections of current state law enforcement procedures and complaint procedures. Under law enforcement procedures, this section defines police officers' actions during traffic stops, search consent, information request, and audio-visual surveillance. We have never been trained in those areas because we don't perform those functions. The second one would be pertaining to complaint procedures. This legislation would mandate that investigating law enforcement agencies, investigating the firefighter or police officer, give out any information except that they would be able to give out any information except the redacted info sought by anyone before the investigation is complete. This would involve a criminal or departmental investigation. I know my brother Tony Capezza offered written testimony that the releasing of information in the middle of an investigation would be a violation of the present police officers' Bill of Rights, and I'm pretty sure you can't pass a law that would violate another law. And I'll just remind all of you that the firefighters are not covered under the police officers' Bill of Rights. I'll close with this. In addition to our objection that firefighters would now be deemed law enforcement by a state statute, I've always believed that everyone is innocent until proven guilty, and everyone should be afforded due process. And unfortunately, I know that's not always the case, And I'm not just talking about police officers or firefighters, but I'm talking about everyday people. But legislation like this flies right in the face of due process. The releasing of information that pertains to an ongoing investigation, information that may not have been proven accurate yet, doesn't seem fair to anyone under investigation that this unproven information would be made public. And if I got a little more time, I just want to give you an example that may be a little dramatic, but because we've never been associated with being law enforcement like this bill would do, many times when we go on emergency services calls, the person is either unconscious, in their car, in their house, and obviously because we don't know this person and there's no family around, we are taught to look at the surroundings to see if we can ascertain what kind of medical condition this person could be going through. That includes if we're in someone's house or in someone's car and they're unconscious or they're not able to answer our questions. That would be looking around for prescription bottles to give us an idea of what kind of illness this person had. If it happened to be an overdose, looking around to see if we could find any paraphernalia that would lead us to know what kind of drug was used, that we could give the right medication to counteract that. If we're deemed law enforcement and we come under that first law that would apply to us about search consent, well, you know, in that law, you can't, the police officer can't search unless he has a reasonable suspicion or probable cause of criminal activity. We're there on an emergency run. We're there on a rescue run. Would that, now that may be a dramatic example, but I don't know, because we've never faced this before, where we're considered law enforcement, and we would come under these laws of search consent and information request and things like that. So for those reasons, we're against this bill, and I'll take any questions.
Any questions from committee members? Representative Knight.
Hey, Paul, it's Jason Knight. How are you?
Hi, Rep. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, I'm having trouble finding in the bill where firefighters are designated law enforcement. Do you know where that is, if you happen to have a copy in front of you?
Yes, and I hope you can tell me I made a mistake, because then I'll hang up and be a happy man tonight. So if you look at page 15, line 22, line 22.
Right.
Law enforcement agency means any police agency or department of the state of any political subdivision. Now, every municipality is a subdivision. So that's where we're saying, we think that doesn't encompass just fire. We think that this law would encompass any department of any political subdivision, which a political subdivision of the state is any municipality. So we think this incorporates all departments. But then why we think it adds police and fire, if you go to page 17, Rep.
Yeah.
And line 27I, when it starts talking about what they can give out, it says items involving the medical history of person employed by law enforcement agency, and then it says such as. So it doesn't say including police. It doesn't say including fire or paramedic. It says by a law enforcement agency, such as police officer, peace officer, firefighter, or paramedic.
So I think it's not the intent of the sponsor to include fire departments, and I bet you we could cure that pretty easy if we went back up to 15, page 15, line 22, and we just put in the word police before department. So we would say a law enforcement agency means a police agency or police department. And I think that would cure your problems. The other one that you mentioned just now on page 17 in line 27, those are items that are to be redacted. So you can imagine a situation where I don't know, there's a police report, and the police report is part of the investigation package, and it involves a firefighter who was on scene and, I don't know, had a medical issue or something. That would be redacted under that section.
No, I understand that's the redaction section. But if you read it, it says of a person employed by a law enforcement agency, and they include firefighter and paramedic as being employed by a law enforcement agency, which we are not. So coupled with that sentence and coupled with the one I read to you earlier, I think, I mean, if you're telling me I'm wrong, then, you know, I'll defer to you as the attorney. But I think if you read those two sections, one could reasonably assume that we're part of this, and we're now considered law enforcement by this piece of legislation.
I think, I hear what you're saying, and I think we could totally clean that up, because that is not from what I'm getting, that is not the intent of the bill. This bill is primarily about police. It's not intended to be about fire or rescue.
Okay. All right. Well, we were surprised when we saw a fire at it. We didn't, you know, we've never been considered law enforcement. So if that could be cleared up, but I will throw my 2 cents in that I still think the last part of my testimony, what I said is that I think no information should be released by anybody until the investigation is complete, because a lot of times things they put out, it comes out at the end of the trial, and it comes out at the end of something that some things just weren't true. And, you know, it's already out there. So
I agree with you, Paul. I agree with you.
I appreciate you clearing that up, though.
Any further questions from members of the committee?
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Representative Felix.
Thank you so much. So in regards to the investigatory records or pending investigation, currently under current practice, I do APRA work for the city of Providence, so I can only speak on behalf of what we do in the city. So we actually utilize DCA as a means to withhold any documents that are pending investigation. And then, so that section under this current bill would not be removed completely. It would not even be touched. So that's still a mechanism to withhold any pending investigations, any disciplinary investigations that can arise, right? And then once they are complete, then we can definitely release those records as pursuant should this bill pass. But I just wanted to note it out there that in current practice, we do use current law to withhold records of pending investigations under DCA. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from members of the committee? We're now going to, that concludes testimony on Representative Batista's bill, House Bill 6005. We're now going to move back to Whip Kazarian's bill 6003, and Vice Chair Messier is going to take over, and we're going to hear testimony from witnesses signed up on 6003, and then after that we'll hear from Representative Potter and witnesses signed up on 5755.
Okay. Do we have Madison Mendel? Hello, Madison.
Hi.
Hi, you're going to be testifying on 6003?
Yep.
You can go ahead. Madison?
Hi.
Hi, you can go ahead with your testimony.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and members of the House State Government and Elections Committee. My name is Madison Mandel, and I'm a junior at Brown University and co-founder of Brown Votes, the nonpartisan student organization dedicated to increasing voter participation and facilitating civic engagement. We strongly support H6003, the Let RI Vote Act. This legislation promotes equal voting access while also improving election administration. I will highlight the student perspective in my testimony today. I have consulted extensively with a highly engaged group such as the College Democrats of Rhode Island, who agree that the reforms in this bill will positively impact college voter turnout. H6003 is a comprehensive bill which includes provisions for the codification of secure ballot drop boxes. Today I will focus on this element of the legislation.
I have submitted supplemental written testimony with further insights on how components such as the expansion of early voting and the removal of the burdensome two-witness or notary requirement to vote by mail are essential to increasing student voter participation. In 2020, Rhode Island voters greatly benefited from the implementation of secure ballot drop boxes. However, this practice is not required by law for future elections. H6003 codifies this additional method of securely casting a ballot with confidence. Drop boxes are particularly helpful to college students. It is my experience that sending out mail while enrolled as a student can be difficult, time-consuming, and present financial burdens. During election season, school mailrooms are often chaotic and overloaded. Lines extend beyond the building and piles of mail line the counters, and students are at risk of their ballots not arriving in time to count. This bill specifically requires the installation of a drop box at each campus of a public institution of higher education that has 500 or more enrolled students. Each town and city would also be required to have at least one drop box, creating options for students attending private institutions like Brown. The availability of secure drop boxes provides student voters with an accessible and efficient method for returning their mail ballot and having their votes counted. Being active participants in our democracy is an important value to me and my peers. Our generation is increasingly politically engaged, and we must build on this momentum by ensuring we remove all barriers to voting. I ask that you support H6003. Passing this legislation will increase voter accessibility for students, which is essential to empowering lifelong voter participation, the bedrock of our democracy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Madison. Can you hold on for a minute? There's someone here that would like to say hello.
Hi, Madison. It's Edie Agello. It's Edie Agello, your state representative, House District 1. And I'd just like to welcome you to the State House in this new normal. Well done with your testimony, and keep up the good work with the Brown College Dems.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Okay, thank you, Madison. Next, we'll go to Jane Coster. Hello, Jane.
And I would like
Hi.
to welcome you to the State House.
Yeah, you'll have to turn that down.
Well done with your testimony, and keep up the good work with the Brown College. Okay.
Okay, Jane, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you. Okay, thank you, Chairman and members of the House Committee on State Government and Elections. My name is Jane Coster, President of the League of Women Voters, testifying for the League tonight on Bill number 6003. The League of Women Voters of Rhode Island strongly supports this bill to codify provisions that would make voting in Rhode Island as safe and accessible as possible. For over 100 years, the League has been a leader in seeking to educate voters to increase participation in voting as key to a strong democracy. Any process that makes it easier to register, to obtain a ballot, and cast that ballot will increase voter participation. More people voted in November last year than ever before in the history of our country, and many took advantage of being able to vote by mail. You now have the opportunity to strengthen our democracy here in Rhode Island by making permanent provisions that were tested and worked well 4 times during this past year of the pandemic. The League supports all the provisions in this bill and could even emphasize the importance of being able to request mail ballots online and removing the requirement for stating a reason for not voting in person. 30% of Rhode Island's voters chose to use mail ballots when they were mailed applications for them last year. House Bill 6003 will allow voters to request mail ballots online, thereby saving the time and expense to the state of mailing applications to everyone. The record shows that mail ballots were valued last year, particularly as voters were able to either return them by mail or by drop box. This made voting both convenient and safe. Additionally, this bill, House Bill 6003, does away with the antiquated idea that voters need an excuse to request a mail ballot. Under this bill, any voter may vote by mail without the need for an excuse or special circumstance. So the League of Women Voters urges you to pass 6003 to protect our democracy and good governance in Rhode Island. And I thank you, Chair, and all members of the committee.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the witness? Thank you. Next, we'll go to Christina Contreras-Fox.
Or special circumstance. So the League of Women Voters urges
You've got to turn down that, whatever you're listening to.
Governance in Rhode Island. I'm so sorry.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Here we are. I'm sorry. I was hitting the mute button, but it was not muting. But thank you very much for your patience, Chair Messier. And good evening to you and members of the House Committee on State Government and Elections. My name is Christina Contreras-Fox, and my pronouns are she, her, and I am the Senior Policy Analyst for the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless. We envision a state where no Rhode Islander experiences homelessness, and I'm here to give our strong support to House Bill 6003. On March 2nd, not even a month ago, Rhode Islanders went to the polls to decide the future of state proposed housing investments, and voters ultimately approved $65 million for affordable housing and community revitalization. Big decisions about housing and homelessness are consistently made in elections, and the voices of those most impacted by such decisions, our neighbors experiencing homelessness and our housing insecurity, deserve to be heard. The votes of Rhode Islanders experiencing homelessness matter as equally as everyone else's. The right to vote isn't contingent upon your housing status, yet access to the ballot is not equal for all voters and potential voters, and we believe that these inequities can be addressed by the General Assembly passing H 6003. This bill will make it easier for all Rhode Islanders to vote by increasing opportunities to vote, like extending early voting periods, making it easier to cast your ballot, doing things like physically providing more drop boxes, and eliminating red tape, such as requiring multiple witness signatures or notary stamps. These improvements stand to benefit Rhode Islanders experiencing homelessness. Right now, these kinds of barriers loom disproportionately high over these voters. So thank you very much for the opportunity to testify before you tonight, and I hope that all of you will give H 6003 your full support. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, Steve Brown from the ACLU. Robert Marshall? Okay.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Rhode Island Developmental Disabilities Council on this bill. We find this bill that gives many choices for how to vote to be very helpful. Excuse me.
Yes.
Okay. We find this bill that allows many choices for how to vote to be very helpful for people with disabilities in making their decision on how to get to the polls without obstacles. We especially value the removal of the signatures on the mail ballots, since in many cases this means for someone that's disabled inviting someone into the voting booth with them, even when that voting booth is at home. So we ask that you give good consideration to this and make voting more acceptable for all voters, especially those with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I thought. All right, Bill 5755 by Representative Potter. It's a House resolution respectfully urging Rhode Island's congressional delegation to reduce military spending and prioritize climate action. We have a number of witnesses for this bill, so let's start out. Peter Nightingale. Hello, Mr. Nightingale?
Speaking.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You can go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm Peter Nightingale. I live in Kingston, and I'm a professor of physics at the University of Rhode Island. And I'm testifying in support of the House resolution that you're discussing right now. But I'm actually testifying on behalf of the Rhode Island Poor People's Campaign, national call for moral revival. We are a network of individuals, congregations, and community organizations. Dr. Martin Luther King said, and this is 54 years ago, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. As I said, that was 54 years ago. Today, we're not approaching spiritual death. We are there. Each year, 250,000 Americans die prematurely because of poverty. Victims of that yearly silent pandemic are disproportionately poor and people of color. Half a COVID-19 pandemic every year. The House and Senate Armed Services Committees have ignored this danger for over a decade. They got warnings from the intelligence community about the danger of pandemics, and they did nothing, but they kept funding the military. Half of our congressional delegations, as you know, are members of the Armed Service Committees. Climate change will dwarf pandemic fatalities. I could go on and on and on. Let me just end with this. There is the militarized police, and there was an article in the New York Times just a couple of days that investigated how the Black Lives Matter protests during the summer were dealt with. And it turns out the police was unprepared, and the methods that they had were military methods. What goes around comes around. Let me leave it at that, and let me thank you very much for your time, and I hope that you will push this resolution through, because the congressional delegation really has to hear from us. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'm ready to take those.
Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, thank you, Peter. We now have Representative Potter. Would you like to address your bill? Go ahead.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I appreciate your time tonight. And thank you, members of the committee, as well. So this resolution came to me from some really passionate climate and peace activists that asked me to put this in, and I thought there was a lot of merit to it as a way of framing really how we shift our priorities and how we prioritize things by the way of what's in our budget. So the resolution before you respectfully urges our congressional delegation to prioritize decreasing our ever-growing defense spending budget and instead prioritize investing and transition our economy to a modern one that will adequately address the gravity of our climate crisis. The basis, of course, for our defense spending is to protect the safety and security of our nation. We know that climate change is an existential threat, not only for our nation, but for the world. And that's why it's so critical that the United States continues its role in modern history of being a global leader by leading by example and demonstrating that we recognize in modern times our safety and security will not be had with more war, but in truly addressing the biggest threat we face as a people, and that's climate change. Now, thankfully, we now once again have an administration that acknowledges science and recognizes the reality of climate change, and we should all be especially proud that just yesterday our chamber passed very critical climate-related legislation with the Act on Climate. But on the federal side, there remains a steady trend of an increasing Pentagon budget riddled with wasteful spending that, when mirrored against the myriad of challenges that we face make it very clear that we need an urgent shift in our priorities. Estimates put our current defense budget at $934 billion per year. It's well more than 3 times that of the next closest country. It's more than the next 10 countries' military budgets combined. Our military spending is so massive that it accounts for almost 40% of the global total of military spending. Domestically, it accounts for over 50% of our discretionary spending. And with over half of it being paid to private defense contractors, it's incredibly wasteful, with at least $46 billion that we know about being lost on programs that were ultimately canceled. Now, one of the saddest facts of all this, when you consider it, is that only a fraction of our total amount spent is going to veterans and their families, many of whom have made the ultimate sacrifice, and many of whom have been wounded in war and continue to suffer from the trauma they experienced in their service to our country, which is evident by one of the most jarring statistics that I've personally ever heard, and that's that on average we lose 22 veterans every day to suicide. So in the interest of our national security, we need our Congress to not be influenced by private defense contractors who are protecting their financial interest, but a Congress with a clear-eyed acknowledgement of the threat we face that will appropriate our spending towards what will truly protect our nation's long-term safety and long-term safety and security. So I thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee for hearing my testimony, and I'm happy to take any questions that any members may have. Thank you.
Are there any questions for the witness? No? Okay. All right, we'll continue on with our list here. How about Greg Garrett? Hello, Greg?
Yes.
Hi. You're testifying on House Bills 5755. You can go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Great. Thank you. My name is Greg Garrett. I live in Providence. I have been studying the war machine for a long time. I don't actually remember President Eisenhower saying it, but he said, "Beware the military-industrial complex." We are spending more money than than the next 10 countries in the world. And has it increased our national security? No, because we have a military spending so much on big weapon systems when the age of the big weapon system is over. We are not getting national security from atomic weapons. We are not getting national security from the F-35 that doesn't even work. We are not getting national security from trying to intervene in small countries' internal and ethnic conflicts. It doesn't work at all. The real national security issue for the American people is climate change. If we keep spending money on the military to the point where we bankrupt the country, our debt increases every day because of the military, we are not going to survive. We need a national program to truly move us away from military spending and towards climate spending, towards justice, towards peace. And these things are not even discussed in America. We need a real discussion of what it takes to get the peace and national security. Congress has not done this because the Pentagon has military contractors in 430 congressional districts. It's time for us to really say to our congressional delegation, and I have said this to them personally, it's time to spend a lot less money on the war machine and a lot more money on our communities and our security and climate. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for the witness? Okay, we'll move right along to Enrique Sanchez. Hi, good evening. Enrique, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, then you have the floor. Go ahead with your testimony. Try to keep it to 2 minutes or less. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for having this very important bill presented. My name is Enrique Sanchez. I am here representing the BLM RIPAC and Providence Democratic Socialists of America. I would like to thank our representatives for presenting this bill. Very, very important bill that would House Bill 5755 that would urge our congressmen to reduce military spending and prioritize climate change actions. I want to start out with a very important talking point. I want to state that in any other civil society, our congressmen, our two federal senators, and our two U.S. representatives would be considered war criminals because of their supports for a very powerful military-industrial complex that supports war and terror, military funding across the globe. A lot of this funding that they prioritize goes to atrocities being committed against Syrian civilians, against civilians in Yemen, against civilians in Iraq and Afghanistan, and across the Middle East. And also, a lot of these fundings that all four of them support towards, the Congress and the Capitol, also finance coup d'etats and different military coups across the world against countries who don't align with Western ideals. We have to do our part here in Rhode Island by starting to prioritize, urge our congressmen to cut back on this funding for the military-industrial complex, for all these major weapons manufacturing companies like Raytheon and Boeing, and start combating very important issues that we're facing here at home, like climate change. And we have to, invest in our climate action groups here in the states that are trying to fight out, big major corporations, oil fossil fuel companies, and we have to work with our leaders who take the stand against folks who do not believe in science, who do not believe that there is a global climate change crisis happening in our states.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony.
So I urge Representative David Cicilline, Representative Jim Langevin, Senator Whitehouse, and Senator Jack Reed to get their priorities straight. People are waking up, and we know that billions and trillions of dollars is being sent over to fund these very big military-industrial complex companies. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions for the witness? Okay, we'll go right on to Leslie William Robinson. Hello, Leslie.
Speaking.
Hi, you can go ahead with your testimony on 5755.
Thank you so much. Good evening, Chairperson and members of the committee. I speak for Resolution 5755. When my daughter is 37 in the year 2050, amid the climate devastation unfolding due to our inaction today, what will I say to her when she asks me this question? What did you in the great state of Rhode Island do in the great climate crisis, Dad, when we still had a chance to make a difference? Well, my beloved daughter, those were the days of endless war when we fed most of our money into the war machine. Fighting forever wars, each year we edged closer to trillion-dollar defense budgets. As military corporations lobbied and corrupted and spending grew and grew, operating through a network of 1,000 bases worldwide, so too did the war machine's greenhouse gas emissions. Soon the military became a bigger polluter than as many as 140 countries combined. And still the military-industrial complex wanted more and more. We stopped counting in the billions with trillion-dollar nuclear weapons programs and trillion-dollar F-35 airplane projects. Sure, we knew that green manufacturing creates over 2,000 more jobs than defence for every $1 billion spent. Sure, we knew that if we followed the modest defence spending reductions recommended by the Sustainable Defence Task Force in 2019 and applied the money to green manufacturing sector, we would create an additional 250,000 jobs while also avoiding ecological, economic and social disaster.
Thank you, Leslie, for your testimony. Are there any questions for the witness? No. Thank you very much. We have, moving on, David. Hello, David?
Yes.
Hi. Do you want to begin your testimony on House Resolution 5755? Please keep it to 2 minutes or less. Thank you.
Okay, I'm approaching this from a different angle. I have a very simple argument, and that's investing in a conversion to green energy to avoid climate catastrophe. It's better than taking money and burning it. That's what the Pentagon does. It wastes billions of dollars every year. Now, how much is wasted is impossible to say. Since 1990, the law says that every department of the government has to undergo an annual audit. But the Pentagon resisted this until 2010 when they agreed to an audit but said it would take 7 years to prepare. It took 8. Finally, audits were conducted in 2018, 2019, and 2020, and they resulted in total failures to account for expenses. And last fall, the Pentagon's controller said it would take another 7 years to pass an audit. To prepare for these audits, the Pentagon wound up spending $1 billion a year on accountants, $400 million on a first set of accountants. When these accountants failed to get the numbers to match up, another $600 million on other accountants to fiddle with the numbers again, and obviously they failed too. But this now seems to be another annual set of contracts for private corporations to make money on. 2 quick horror stories. In 1995, the Defense Business Board, which was made up of corporate executives and consultants from McKinsey, tried to issue a report. They found $125 billion in administrative wastes. And at that point, the Pentagon's entire budget was $580, so that's about 20%. But they found out almost one back office bureaucrat for every troop on active duty. And the report came up with ways that this money could be repurposed to help our troops. So at first the military liked it, but then out of fear that news of this waste would lead Congress to cut the budget, the Pentagon buried the report. We heard Representative Potter talk about $46 billion in waste. $46 billion was the cost of just 12 weapons programs that were canceled between 2000 and 2010 that were total failures. We've heard a couple of references to the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. That's because it's budgeted for $1.5 million over its lifetime, which is the cost of the entire Second Iraq War. And I'm just going to finish up a couple of sentences on the fighter. Its development has been plagued with overruns and fraud. 490 F-35s have been built, and they've had dozens of serious flaws, including nearly 900 software defects. Half of the fleet are grounded at any time, and the Pentagon has contracted for 2,400 more of them, and of course they all fly on fossil fuels. I have a short 2-page written testimony submitted that has annotated facts, including discussion of 3 completely useless ship projects that are ongoing that cost $95 billion.
Yes, we have that testimony, so if you could wrap it up, please.
Yeah, I'm all done.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Any questions for the witness? Okay, we'll move on to Nancy. Is Nancy available? Nancy Houston. Hello, Nancy?
Yes.
Hi, you're here to testify on House Resolution 5755. You can go ahead. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you.
I will. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to testify. I'm Nancy Houston of Cranston, and I'm the clerk of the Providence Advocacy Team affiliated with the Friends Committee on National Legislation. And I'm here to urge you strongly to support passage of this resolution. Since our nonpartisan, non-denominational team formed over 3.5 years ago, we have persistently lobbied our congressional delegation to end endless wars, repeal outdated authorizations for the use of military force, reduce military spending, and increase spending on social needs, education, healthcare, climate change, and so on. It would be marvelous to have you, our representatives at the state level, join us in calling upon the U.S. Congress to reallocate funds away from military spending and towards spending on diplomacy, health, and addressing the dangers posed by climate change. Thank you, Madam Chairman and committee members, for allowing me to testify on behalf of this important matter. I hope you'll support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Any questions for the witness? Okay, now we'll go down to Jonathan. Jonathan Daly LaBelle. Hello, Jonathan?
Yes.
Hi. You're here to testify in House Resolution 5755. You can go ahead with your testimony. Please keep it to 2 minutes or less.
Thank you, Chair Messier. Thank you, Chair Messier and members of the committee. This is Jonathan Daly LaBelle. I'm down in South Kingstown. I'm in District 34, and Representative Teresa Tanzi is my rep. I'm calling today as I would like to support the House Bill 5755. This call to the congressional delegation to reprioritize some of our spending, to reduce our military spending and military footprint, and allocate that more towards climate resiliency and other important societal needs. I think we actually do have it seems insurmountable with especially with the recent run-up in military spending, increasing about 15-16% just in the last 4 years. But we do have a bit of a template in the not-so-distant past where we did bend the curve of military spending. That was just in the late 80s, early 90s. At the end of the Cold War, we started to think about how we were spending and how we didn't necessarily need to be the police person for the world. So we did bring that down. It was pretty level through the 90s, and unfortunately we had a terrible increase, a terrible spike in 2001 with the second Bush presidency. But we do have that template there with us. It doesn't mean that we have to put ourselves at greater risk. In fact, in many ways, it could reduce our risk, as some of the other countries around the world may not feel the need to increase their military spending just to try and keep up with us to some extent. So I hope that this committee will vote on this, not just hold it for further study, but actually take it out of committee and give the House the opportunity to put this to a vote, to call to the congressional delegation in blue state Rhode Island to repurpose some of our funds. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Any questions? All right, we'll move on to Helen O'Grady. Hello, Helen?
Yes.
Hi.
Hello.
You can start your testimony on 5755. Please keep it to 2 minutes or less. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, honorable committee members. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity to testify in favor of H 5755. I am Helen O'Grady, and I am a member of Rhode Island NUM, which stands for No Endless War or Endless Militarism. I support this resolution because I do not want my tax dollars to contribute to an ever-increasing military budget that primarily profits weapon manufacturers at the expense of human life, and because this resolution would be a step toward a more life-affirming and socially productive fiscal policy. All the excessive money spent on endless wars, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Libya, Lebanon, Yemen, and much of Africa, has destabilized us globally and has not made us safer abroad or at home. These countries are in chaos, and we are not any closer to peace. We need to move away from endless militarism to spending that mitigates the effects of climate change, increases climate resilience, and makes us more secure. Military equipment runs on fossil fuels. The Pentagon, as we're hearing, is one of the biggest polluters. Too much of our involvement in endless warfare has been tied to oil production and acquisition. Spending on and prioritizing climate action would defend us and keep us safe from the destructive effects of climate change and would result in economic growth. What is more, too many Rhode Islanders are facing housing insecurity and food insecurity. In a sense, they have become collateral damage as a result of excessive military spending.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you for your testimony. I have just a couple more sentences, Madam Chair, just a couple of sentences. Research indicates that even just a 10% cut in the military budget could house every one of the 500,000 homeless people in the nation with money to spare. It could close the funding gap between white majority and non-white majority school districts. It could create 1 million good infrastructure jobs or 1 million well-paying green energy jobs or provide 2 million college students with free college or hire 900,000 new teachers. This is not just a matter of fiscal efficacy. We have a moral imperative to move away from producing war, death, and destruction. We need to spend more on a green economy and social uplift. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen, for your testimony. Any questions for the witness? All right, we'll move on to Catherine Hillary. Hello, Catherine.
Yes.
Hi, you're here to testify on House Bill 5755. You may go ahead. Please keep your testimony to 2 minutes or less.
Okay. Oh, hi there. My name is Catherine Hillary, and I am from Newport, Rhode Island, speaking on behalf of House Bill 5755. I would specifically like to address my comments to those of you who believe that it is more important to fund the defense industry jobs in Rhode Island far more often than clean energy jobs, education, and healthcare jobs. Our own Watson Institute of International and Public Affairs at Brown University has studied this issue extensively in their paper on the cost of war. They have found that military spending creates fewer jobs than the same amount of money would have if invested in other sectors. Clean energy and healthcare spending creates 50% more jobs than the equivalent amount of money spent on the military. Education spending creates more than twice as many jobs. This is because clean energy construction and education are more labor-intensive with less money needed for equipment and material. Also, a greater percentage of spending on clean energy construction, education, and healthcare creates more domestic jobs. Finally, since wages and benefits are lower in these sectors than they are for military contractors and personnel on average, the same amount of money hires more people in those non-military sectors. $1 billion in military spending creates approximately 11,200 jobs compared to 26,700 jobs in education, 16,800 jobs in clean energy, and 7,200 jobs in healthcare. I implore you to support this bill and put the needs of our people and the health of our planet before another inflated military budget. Thank you.
Oops. Thank you, Catherine. Are there any questions for the witness? No. Okay. We'll move on to Andrew. Andrew Poyant. Hello, Andrew.
Hi.
Hi. You're here to testify on House Resolution 5755. Go ahead, you have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Andrew Poyant, and I'm calling to urge you all to vote on this resolution to decrease our military spending. We've been at war my entire life, dropping bombs on countries halfway across the world, and we would never allow for other countries to do that to us. We don't see the devastation of it on a daily basis, and I feel like we have gone numb to the fact that we are always at war. And I hope that we see peace sometime in my lifetime, hopefully sooner rather than later, and decreasing our military spending is one way to get us towards that. We spend more on our military budget than any other country. We spend almost three times more than the next country, and it's crazy how much we end up spending on war. We spend more on war than we do on everything else domestically, and it's time that we reinvest that money into communities both here, and a small fraction of that could end world hunger. And who would want to do anything to the country that ends world hunger? So I would like to urge everyone to vote this out and out of committee and for a full vote. And thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions for the witness? Okay, we have one more person to testify, Randall Rose. Randall, are you there? Hello, Randall?
Hello.
Hi, Randall. You're here to testify on House Resolution 5755. Can you please keep your testimony to 2 minutes or under? You may go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am in favor of this bill as well. The amount of money that we spend on the military is extremely huge. Where nations going into debt for military spending, and I'm not against military spending in general. I do think we do need to spend some money on a military to defend ourselves, but our nation's military spending is extremely inefficient. We pay billions of dollars for overpriced weapons systems, and the weapon systems that have been developed are really not well suited to defend us. We are invested militarily in a very aggressive posture around the world with bases in well over 100 countries. And at the same time, we don't have weapons that are well suited for modern conflicts, and our weapons are designed as if we are going to always be fighting much weaker countries when many other countries like China are becoming equally capable. I think our nation needs to focus more on real defense, less on these very expensive arms that we've been investing in, and what would keep our country most safe is to focus on resilience, on making sure that we have protection against disasters, against climate change, that we don't rely on far-flung shipping networks that can be easily disrupted in war and so on. And I think we have gotten used to spending trillions on wars, which do not protect us and actually make other nations more angry at us. And it's really not sustainable. I think we should stop spending money on this, and we should focus on making our country more resilient, particularly against climate change. That's the right investment. I know it's a hard change.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions for the witness? Nope, that concludes 5755. Need a
motion to adjourn? Second by